Oh,
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I'd like to call to order our May 15th budget meeting number 1. And I guess we should do, I should make a small announcement. Anybody who's connected to the meeting or in here, please turn off your phones. If you're online, please mute your microphones and turn your video off. Thank you. Yeah, before we get going, I wanted to highlight something. We're recognizing Dave Moyer for his past work, he passed away last year. And I just wanted to read something that's actually in, I think on the back of the budget, but I wanted to show how he was a true example of dedication and service to our city. His service spanned 21 years, which is impressive, from 1975 to 1996. And that's just the direct service, during which he dedicated himself to all of us. He led the city as mayor from 1990 to 1996. He chaired the Public Works Advisory Board from 21 to 23, was on the Urban Forestry Board from 2014 to 2023, and on the Budget Committee from 2019 to 2023. His leadership and unwavering commitment were vital in shaping the policies and initiatives that have made Sisters thrive. And he did a lot of other stuff too. And he was a class man. So I just wanted to highlight that for everybody. We need roll call. Okay,
Sorry,
that's okay.
it's not on speaker.
Committee Member Pellerin,
Here.
Committee Member Cobb,
Here.
Committee Member McDougall,
Here.
Committee Member Letts,
Here.
Committee Member Connolly, Committee Member Preden,
I'm present.
Committee Member Smith,
Here.
Committee Member Blum,
Here.
Committee Member Mahoney,
here.
Committee Member Ross.
Yep.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. The first item on the agenda is the election of a chair. And I'm calling for someone's nomination. Is there anybody that wants to hear their name in a nomination? I really would like somebody from the Budget Committee to.
I'd like to nominate Nancy Cobb.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right,
I hear the train a-coming.
congratulations.
And
All
I
right.
have on top of my agenda, I have WWDD. What would Dave do?
Yeah,
So if you get in trouble, think of what would Dave do?
There you
thank
go.
you. Good job. It's your meeting.
Oh, thank you. Well, you didn't even highlight it for me.
I'm sorry.
We're going to start off
She's got mine. I gave her mine.
with the budget message from the city manager, I believe is it?
You got it.
Before you start, I have a couple of housekeeping questions for you. When we have questions, do you want us to wait till the tab that's listed or interrupt your presentation?
Great question. I'm happy to take interruptions. I'm going to do like a high level overview, talk about trends and highlights, and then we'll do what we've done in the past and have each department head dive into each department budget and fund. And that's when you can kind of do the deep dive questions before deliberations too.
And then potential conflicts of interest. There are several people on the committee that receive funding in some capacity for a board they're on.
It's a good question. I mean, I think unless you're benefiting financially personally, it's usually a class situation where you all represent the city, you all benefit from things that you do as part of a citizenry or as part of being, involved with the city. So, unless there's like a personal benefit where you'll receive money that comes by grant that pays your salary or something like that, but unfortunately there's only one resolution or one, motion at the end to adopt a budget. So you have to recuse yourself from that vote if that's the case, if you actually have a real conflict. That
Great.
makes sense. Yeah.
It for questions from me. Anybody else regarding the process? No? All right.
Great. Well, Chair, members of the Budget Committee, I'm glad we all were able to fit you in at the dais. This is my first budget as your city manager here. And I've been through a few of these over the years. Every city does it a little bit different. The 9 a.m. is a little different for me. So actually, I'm more of a morning person. So thank you for making the time and making this time work. Like I said, we'll have, I'll do a high level summary of the budget, go through trends, go through highlights. Feel free to ask questions throughout that, but I'll focus more at the high level and the big numbers and do a little drill downs on a couple different revenue and expenditures. Finance Director Joe O'Neill will do more of the drill downs and kind of the analysis. And then, like I said, we have our department heads here to go through the funds and departments one by one, allow you to ask all your questions before we get to deliberations and potentially today an adoption of the budget or approval of the budget for the going to the city council. We do have tomorrow morning set aside if needed, if we need more time to deliberate. And we also have to remember that we have a public hearing on state shared revenues today and an opportunity for public comment if any members of the public attend today or attend virtually. And then yeah, we'll feed you too at lunchtime. So we'll try to keep your energy up. I also want to thank staff. They're really the ones that put in the work. Joe and Kim and all the department heads putting in the time to crunch the numbers. I think you're pretty familiar if you've been on the budget committee with Joe's spreadsheet. A lot of detail. It's very nice to see when you come in to a city as a city manager, and you're like, oh, okay, the financial house is in good order. The city's in a good position. I think, as you know, if you've been involved with the process for a while, especially over the last several years, things are looking very positive for the city. A lot of that is growth, obviously related with property tax growth and things like that. So I will cover some of that through my presentation. You'll see that. I think you've probably seen that if you've read the budget already, that overall the city's in good financial health, which makes my mind a little bit at ease. That being said, we have a lot of projects and things ahead of us to work through, which is also pretty exciting, and we'll cover that as well. All right, here's the big numbers. I want to start really high. We're at 33 million. As you can see, a large percentage of that is actually our fund balances that we're rolling from prior years as we build up reserves for major capital projects. And then eventually on the requirement side, you see 18.6 million is still in those reserves. And you might question, 22 million was our beginning fund balance, and then 18.6 million is what's left in the reserves and contingencies. And that is a sign of the direction that we're headed over the next about 5 years as we start to spend down our capital reserves for our major water and wastewater projects and transportation. And that'll be part of the presentations today, is what those projects are and how much they're going to cost. But some of that, a lot of that fund balance will be drained down as we spend our SDC funds, we spend our operation funds out of, or our operation reserves out of the street fund, water fund, and wastewater fund. Total budget by our funds, our general fund is still our largest fund. That may change over time as we start to build up the water and wastewater funds with rate increases and major capital projects coming out of there, probably with debt being the main funding sources. But the general fund is our main operating fund that includes all the day-to-day stuff: police, tourism, administration, community development, and the general fund has a lot of the personnel costs coming out of it, which is one of our biggest operating costs. So this is our operating budget. I like to kind of distinguish between the full budget and the operating budget, because this is a reflection of what the day-to-day costs are for running the city. So this takes out capital, one-time transfers, and I include debt service because that's a long-term commitment, usually 30 years or more, that you're paying debt for major capital projects. So I like to include that in the operating budget, because if all of a sudden the spigots stop and we're not collecting any revenue, do we have enough to cash flow to keep things operating as we work through emergencies and things like that? So about 8.2 million for a city of 4,000 is yeah, pretty good. And another thing that I like to look at as I look at the health of a city is how are we balanced operating, right? So here's a look at our general fund operations. And so this looks at what our ongoing revenues are in the general fund, or you can call them general revenues, property taxes being the most major one. The other taxes on that second line there is the hotel, motel, or the transit lodging taxes. Includes things like business license fees and stuff like that, intergovernmental. But overall, these are the things that we can expect to bring in every year in revenue. And then on the operating expenses in the general fund is, personal services and materials. So those are the ongoing costs. And I look to see if we're balanced, and we are. We're actually pulling in a little more revenue on the operating side than expenses, which is a good sign, a good thing, good position to be in, meaning we don't have to spend reserves to keep our ongoing operations going. And here's a look at our general fund by department. In our community development department is our largest department. We have I think the most staff in that department. It includes code enforcement now. Council manager includes a lot of things that are kind of the, not just staff costs, but grants, one-time expenses for like the housing, affordable housing fund, things like that. Police, and I'll talk a little bit about police towards the end of the presentation, sitting around 800,000. We can expect that to continue to climb. We have a contract that we're going to be negotiating this next year, and potential to add another deputy, which will add cost to that. So police eventually will probably be our biggest expense out of the general fund at some point, if not next year, the following year, or in the next 5 years. Back to reserves. The city is in a pretty healthy position, and to credit Joe and the team for being pretty fiscally prudent and budgeting conservatively to make sure that we have enough money in the bank to handle any kind of emergencies. Being in a fire-prone area, I think that's important to know, that if something did happen, we have a lot of funds in contingency and our reserve for future expenditures to kind of handle unforeseen events or emergencies. And also helps with a city that relies a lot on, the 1.6 million in property taxes that only come in during October to have a cash flow, so that we have enough in the bank to be able to pay staff and other major expenses as we wait to collect property taxes. But, almost 5 million now in our general fund reserves is actually pretty remarkable for a city of our size. And it's a good position to have. That being said, about half of these reserves are reserved for some kind of purpose. The affordable housing reserve there is a earmark for the Northwest Housing Alternatives Project, 500,000. So that's at those ARPA funds. The operating contingency is something that we appropriate and budget every year. That's our main sort of unforeseen event that we need to pull money from. Council says, oh, we got to do this. We didn't budget for it. Can we move money out of contingency into an expenditure line? We bumped that up from 706 to 1.1 million now. I just feel a little bit better if we have at least 3 months of operating in our bank now to handle any kind of major emergency and have that contingency in there. It's a best practice. I think it's almost 30%, which is really healthy, and I would recommend council and the budget committee to try to maintain that even as we weather economic downturns and things like that, to have a strong contingency. Including, and on top of the contingency, something that the City of Sisters has, which again, credit to Joe and the team here, is establishing that rainy day fund. Someone's getting a text. And the reason why a rainy day fund I think is important for this city in particular is back to the revenues in the general fund. We had about $1 million coming from lodging taxes. Now, the thing about lodging taxes is that it's volatile, right? That's not a predictable necessarily tax that we can assume that we can collect and pay for things like police and public safety and administration and planning work. And so that allows us to kind of hedge against that volatility. Say we had some kind of calamity or a recession and people stopped traveling and going to hotels. you know, it puts us a little bit at risk of not having that revenue coming in. One thing that we do here that is kind of unique, some cities do this kind of split, is all our franchise fees. So the fees that our utility providers like PGE, Northwest Natural, garbage, that revenue is typically a general revenue that goes into general funds. We actually put that towards a street fund, which is great for a street fund, for the health of our streets and everything. But it's a you know, pretty stable revenue source for the general fund that is not collected and spent out of the general fund. And that's fine. It's just something to be aware of, and why that rainy day fund is pretty important to kind of keep reserve there in case we see a downturn with lodging. And on top of that, because we're so contract heavy, right? We don't have our own police force. We support Explore Sisters, our economic development activities through EDCO. That rainy day fund is a way to kind of secure those contracts in case we don't have the revenue coming in. We can honor our contracts for another year or two, whatever, basically as a cushion or a contingency for those contracts. But anyways, the good message here is, you know, 4.9 million in the general fund. The reserve for future expenditure is you know, another buffer for that cash flow purposes, but also something that is really undesignated. And, you know, the budget committee and council can look at that as kind of a, you know, a surplus or something above our capital replacement reserve. So if there's any like one-time, you know, sources or uses, or the city needs to find some gap funding for a major project or something, for like a park, for example, that reserve for future expenditures might be a source that we can look to as an option for that. Any questions about so far? I'm gonna keep driving forward. If there, feel free to interrupt though. So reserves and other funds. So I mentioned earlier about starting to spend down our capital reserves in our utility funds, our enterprise funds, and also our special revenue funds. The street fund in particular, we got some major projects that we'll go over where we're starting to spend those we saved up those reserves over time. We're now executing on those projects. So we're starting to see that. And then in the future, in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll especially be spending down the sewer fund, especially the SDC funds, in the water fund, the sewer fund. So the budget actually might go down in the future, and we're like, oh, the budget's going down. Well, that's the operating budget's going to go up, but our overall budget will go down as we're spending our reserves. And that's a good thing. We're investing in our community, right? We don't want to just be sitting on cash. And at the same time, I'll show you a slide here that there is a benefit of having cash on hand. I'm going to highlight a few revenues, and you know, we'll go into more detail on some of this stuff. I just want some things like, you know, graphs and lines and things to look at that give you a sense of where we're at with the city in both revenue and expenditures, and then some trends. Property taxes. This is always good to see. Every city, this is what you'll see, except for usually it's closer to the 3 to 4% range, right? The state of Oregon's property tax system, as you know, is set off of assessed values and not real market values. So you have a guaranteed 3% growth as long as real market values are above the assessed values. Here, because of our population growth and development, we're seeing above that statutory 3%. So we're averaging, you know, close to 7%. So that's that 3% plus all the new development. So you know, really healthy property tax growth. Like I said, we're up to, I think, $1.6 million now in property tax revenue going into the general fund. This is sort of an opportunity to kind of, you know, share where those taxes go. And in terms of a property tax bill, a lot of, you know, it's just a public education sort of opportunity. You know, the city only receives about 20% of a total tax bill. If you have a house in Sisters and you pay property tax, you can probably see these numbers. But most of the taxes go to either education or special service districts here in the county. But the city only receives about, you know, like I said, 20%. So on a house that's assessed at about $200,000, we're getting about $500 for the general fund, and then about $150 of that goes towards urban renewal. And so back to that distinguishing based off, you know, the Measure 5 and Measure 50 legislation, separated real market values and assessed values. This is really interesting to see because it's kind of demonstrates what I think folks here feel, right? Like, wow, like Central Oregon has really accelerated and become really expensive, really attractive and popular, and took a while to climb out of the recession, if you remember the Great Recession and what the impact had on Central Oregon. Back in 2014-15, real market values, which is really, what is your house worth or your property worth if you put it up to a market, on the market versus what is assessed value and where you pay your property taxes on, we're pretty close, right? And which is scary for cities because that puts you into compression where you might not see that 3% per year, and which we kind of rely upon to keep up with, inflation and cost of living adjustments and things like that. But since COVID, that line has really started to accelerate to the moon. And, on one hand, that's great for building wealth if you were here before 2020. On the other hand, it really is, one of the main things that we're working on: housing affordability, affordable housing, workforce housing, to make this community affordable and attractive for everybody. But the 16% average real market growth is pretty remarkable. And I think that's a reflection of Central Oregon, but also just how things have changed even in our nation over the last 4 or 5 years. Is it me or is it? Oh, it's not. Okay, so here's another revenue spotlight. This is back to that lodging tax point I was making about the volatility. Prior to 2019, you could see that it was growing each year. Sister was becoming more popular. It was, short-term rentals were really starting to get more popular, back in the aughts and the teens. And then the little dip there is towards the tail end of 2020, COVID related. But then after everybody was told to stay home for a few months, everybody wanted to travel. And not everybody was going on airplanes. Instead, they were jumping into their cars and coming to places like Sisters to recreate and probably stay in hotels and in short-term rentals. And we really saw an explosion of the lodging tax increase. We're seeing that soften now. Maybe we've gotten through this sort of bubble of local travel and people have gotten back on planes, or because of inflation in the economy right now, people are not traveling as much, kind of holding back, kind of waiting to see if things will get more affordable. But you can see that we're projecting in our lodging tax to see a little decline there. But overall, we're way above where we were before. And like I said, this is an important revenue source for our general fund that supports things like our public safety contract.
Yes, I'd really like to see that particular graph broken out, showing STRs as one thing and hotels and other lodging separate, and see how the lines are.
That'd be
I think it
great,
would
yeah.
Super helpful.
Yeah, I think we could dig into that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, another revenue spotlight here is utility rates. The council will be considering an increase to our utility rates next meeting. We had a work session on this. If you haven't received it already, there's going to be like a 2-pager going out to share public information about the rate increases, what it's going to support, why it's needed. But we're looking at another, several years of rate increases to support major capital projects, which you'll learn about today in our water and wastewater utilities. This is a snapshot of what we're looking at in terms of what's proposed for the next few years, with 12% in the water fund and then 4% for our wastewater rates. Overall for this proposed year, we're looking at about a $5.50 increase per month for the average residential bill. So that's incorporated in the budget. So that would be reflected in the revenues in the water fund and wastewater fund. Here's how we'll stack up versus other communities in Central Oregon with this increase. So going from about $71 to $76 for the average single family home for the water and wastewater bill. And like I said, we're looking at another 5 years of rate increases. Other cities are too. There's not many cities anymore that do not increase utility rates. You know, obviously Redmond's got big projects coming up too, and you know, as well as these other communities. So affordability is always on our mind, but we also need to be able to keep our town livable by having enough water capacity and conveyance, enough wastewater treatment storage, and you know, with the Lazy Z. So some major projects coming up, but wanted to share that because in this budget, we're including increased revenue from these rate increases. Another thing I like to track, because, well, we pave roads and we keep our roads in good conditions. And Sisters has done a great job, both through, I think, new roads being developed, but also the work that our Public Works Department does on staying on top of our road condition. We have, like I said, some advantages here. We have a local gas tax of 3 cents. And then we also have the franchise fees going into the street fund. And those revenue sources support our annual pavement maintenance program, doing overlays, slurry seals, crack sealing, all those projects that help maintain the condition of our roads. I think we're sitting at what, 81, 82 PCI, which is pretty amazing. I've actually never been in a city that had a PCI that high, which is
Can you
great.
explain that for us?
Oh, sorry. So this is a pavement condition index. So it's a survey you do of your roads. It's graded from 0 to 100, 100 being a brand new road, 0 being to basically chaos and gravel or whatever. What? Yeah. You know, Ben's working on that. They're doing a transportation utility fee. I'm not going to get into the future of our street fund, but it's something I think the council and the budget committee needs to be aware of, that the gas tax won't sustain us forever. That we'll probably have to look at alternate revenue sources eventually, just like the state will be looking at for the next legislative session. But right now we're in good position. We're pumping enough money into our roads to keep our PCI. Anything above 80, by the way, is a really good thing. That means on average, your street network is in a good or excellent condition. So we want to maintain that. And the best way to maintain that is to do the treatments now rather than later. You don't want it to deteriorate where it gets really expensive to rebuild a road. So this graph shows, you know, we're pretty flat on city gas tax. That's probably just a, you know, phenomenon about how many gas stations we have, but how many cars come through Sisters in Central Oregon. And also the fact that we're probably seeing that more acutely with electric vehicles instead of gas vehicles here in town, but also regionally, and just, you know, the trend towards more electric vehicles. The reason the state gas tax is going up is 2 things. One, House Bill 2017 increased it by 10 cents. That was implemented over several years. And so I think we've seen the last of that kick in this next fiscal year. And then it's also distributed per capita. So as a city grows, we actually get more revenue from the state on state share revenues, gas taxes, things like that. So we do benefit, you know, through growth that way. So we've seen the state gas tax go up.
So something maybe on our radar is to, with all the EV charging stations going in, whether they're private or they're ours, maybe putting a fee on that to make up for lack of.
Possibly. Yeah. It's one option to look at, and seeing how that, what kind of structure that is, how much revenue that would generate. Does it compare to a gas tax? But yeah, we'll have to analyze all this, and eventually we'll see that state gas tax line. I mean, it will be buffered by growth probably that we'll get per capita, but we'll probably see that, like other communities are starting to see, is that flatten off and eventually decline. All right, on the expenditure sides, first of all, personnel, our biggest operating expense, I think maybe not actually, because we're contract with police, is we're at 20.5 FTE, which is, I'll show a graph over time here, but one more FTE. We're adding a capital projects manager, a capital projects director position. We're still working on the job descriptions for that position, but that will be a position that would report to me, but essentially another department head level position. Full disclosure, we have a great candidate here, basically moving Paul into that position to manage our capital projects over the next 5 years. So we have about 30 to $40 million in projects. That's a big lift for a city of our size. We have somebody, Paul, who's very experienced with our utility system, is a great project manager. It's a pretty, I think, wise financial decision to be able to have that on staff and manage all these projects, which you can have consultants, engineers, multiple contractors, the financing side of it as well. So we'll slot him into that position. That means we'll have to recruit for a new public works director. But succession planning, we'll have, Paul on staff to be able to, work through that with the new person, which I think is pretty special, and also just be able to take advantage of that opportunity. A lot of cities don't get that opportunity to have that kind of overlap. So that's the new position that we're proposing with this budget, funded by the 4 utilities or 4 funds. And implement this year, because you'll see we're starting all that design engineering work on these projects now, which means a lot of contracts and engineers and things like that starting in the works. Other drivers on personnel, 3.4% was the COLA. We take a combination of what the CPI is. And I'll show you a graph of the CPI in a second. It's really interesting. The new number came out today, actually at 3.4%. But it's a combination of the Social Security increase and the CPI. I think we used March, so 3.3 and 3.5, and we took the mid ground. We also do merit increases after doing performance reviews every summer. Those are built in at 3%, and then there's a 10% health insurance increase as well. So,
Can I interrupt for a second?
oh yeah,
CPI is Consumer Price Index.
yeah. Sorry, Consumer Price Index. Yeah.
The merit is not guaranteed, correct? It's based on performance?
It's based on performance. Yeah, but
Thank you.
yeah, we assume a budget with every position that's not at the top set at 3%. Here's the org chart. So I highlighted there the capital projects manager and where that would fit into the department or into the organization. Otherwise, it looks probably pretty familiar to what it looked like before. We haven't made any organizational changes other than this proposal. The new position that was approved last year was the deputy recorder. Hello, Rebecca. And so that's a change you might notice from before, but that was proposed in the last budget and we've implemented. So this is our 20.5. We do have 2 vacancies. 2 utility workers are still, those positions are still vacant. We're still working on those recruitments. Been working on it since I've been here. So tough positions to recruit for. I think it's a situation of, we're kind of on an island in Central Oregon, and the cost of living is a factor. Commutes and things like that are a factor. So, I do have to say the public works department, the crew that we have now are high performing. They're great. But as the city grows, we are still looking for more help to kind of fill in there and be able to get the work done.
Jordan, on that org chart that you have, that's different than the one that's in the book. Am I correct?
Yeah, the one in the book, I think the new position was still shown under Public Works, but I had got to move that up under. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. FTEs over time, just a look at this, we really haven't grown. I mean, with all the population growth over the last 10 years, basically doubling in population since 2011 or 12, something like that. We really haven't increased a lot in FTE, just a couple positions. Going from, I think the city has been around 18 for a long time. Like I said, we're now budgeted at 20.5, so a small increase. But one thing that we have to do as a growing dynamic city is continue to look at where do we strategically invest in personnel, like what positions make sense as the city grows, especially if we do have ongoing revenue coming in. What are those areas that we need more support? Last year, we added the deputy recorder to add more capacity for special projects and administrative work, and especially communications. That's an area that we'll continue to kind of look at. How are we doing there? We added code enforcement a few years ago, right? This community was like, hey, we need more, oversight over long grass and stuff, nuisances and things like that. So, as the city grows and becomes a little bit bigger with, more issues and just more workload, we'll have to look at where it makes sense to add positions. Like I said, utilities, we're still down with a couple positions, and then we're adding that capital projects director, which is, I think, a strategic investment given where we're going over the next 5 years. And then finally, a focus on debt here. I just wanted to make the point. This is, what we look like today, which really low debt, 461,000 in debt service payments, and that's going to continue to decrease for another year or so until it will probably rapidly increase. Because in order to pay for big, expensive utility projects, you need to go out for loans or bonds or other funding that will be, debt serviced over 20 or 30 or even longer. So this chart will change probably next year, for sure, in the next couple years as sewer and water loans pop on. But in terms of general fund debt, we really just have that debt service for the city hall, which is, petering out, as you can see. No GO bonds, as you saw on the property tax chart. We don't have any voter approved debt for the city.
A GO bond?
Oh, general obligation, so voter approved, so something that you would vote on, like the schools. So there's definitely general obligation debt in town for the school district and fire district, I think, but nothing from the city. And we don't really have anything on the horizon, except if the council wants to explore something like that for, say, a park, open space, things like that, to ask the citizens if they would support a bond. But nothing planned right now, or they haven't even discussed that. And then capital will cover projects today, but 5.4 million. I always love to see a big capital budget, right? Operations is the day-to-day stuff. That's what you need to pay, right? Services are provided by staff, and that's just the reality. But capital is the investments you're making in your community for the future. So new street projects, pathways, and then we'll be ramping up on the sewer side and the water side too. Some big expenditures coming. All right, just some snapshots and just more information to have in your pocket as we go through the budget. We're up to 3823 is our population. That's the certified estimate from PSU. With the current development happening, I expect this number you'll see that first number being a 4 next year, given, the Sunset Meadows and the Woodlands developments, being built right now. Median age, you'll see different numbers in different places. I think this might have been the American Community Survey, but it's somewhere between 47 and 49, which, is, I think it's been increasing over time as we've had retirees move into the community and just, aging population. Households about 1,300, and then the median home price. This is taken from the Beacon report, I think for April that quarter, and it's up to 715. So pretty expensive, and this is in line with what you see probably in Bend, and definitely higher than other communities in Central Oregon like Lapine, Madras, Prineville. So again, something council's watching, cares about, trying to invest in more affordable housing and workforce housing.
Can I ask you a question about the median income?
Yeah.
That's taking a senior that moved here and is on a fixed income combined with the employees that are working here. And so
Yeah, that's just a straight up, all the income from everybody who lives here, what's the median income. So
it's skewed based upon
definitely
retirement.
people that have less, definitely people that have more, yeah,
Thank you.
household. Here's that population line, and again, that acceleration in the last decade or so. Slow coming out of the recession, but really accelerating now after getting through that, and then folks wanting to come here, build here, and create more opportunities for people to live here. That number is going to continue, like I said, to go up until we may see a point in time as we work through the urban growth boundary expansion where available lands for expansion and development may slow, right? We still have some properties, especially here around Adams Street and Locust, that could be developed, and so there could be more projects in the pipeline before we expand the UGB. But, we might see just, in the next maybe 3 years, depending on annexations and things like that, the population growth not accelerating at, the 8 to 10% per year, but slow down as we just we'll run out of land to build new homes. Here's a big angry mountain of inflation that we were dealing with over the last a couple of years. It's definitely settled down after the Fed increased, the rates, and so we're now sitting around, like I said, between 3 and 4%. It's kind of been stubborn around that, and we'll see what the Fed continues to do over the next year in terms of rates. But the reason why we watch inflation is because it does affect us, right? It affects the prices we pay for things, equipment, contracts, things like that. And obviously the cost of living adjustments that we tie, our pay increases to.
I'll just add that at the EDCO board meeting I had last week, they had a presenter from the Federal Reserve speaking to this. And it was recorded. I was hoping I could get it out to everybody beforehand, but they hadn't posted it yet because it was really fascinating. But they were, saying that the Federal Reserve likes to have that interest rate, not interest rate, the inflation at 2%. So they're pretty happy that it's, close to 3 at this point. But they kind of broke it down, and that's definitely goods have come down a lot. And services are still high, but are trending down. They said housing is still high and not seeming to budge.
Yeah.
At this point. So it was kind of helpful for me to see that moving forward and reading this budget, having those in my head. So I just wanted to kind of share that for everybody, that I think things are getting better, but not as fast as we want them to be. And also, everybody puts up a chart like this, you forget this is a cumulative chart. It's like you add every year onto the price of something. So even though it's come down, we're still paying that extra 9% from a few years ago. It's just added in now. So.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And here's a correlation. As rates go up, so does our interest revenue. So interest at our LGIP account is where we hold our funds. So that 20 million in fund balance that's sitting there across all funds is just collecting a lot of interest that we distribute to each of our different enterprise, special revenue, and general funds. So this is one of those reasons why we've been able to grow our fund balances, especially in the general fund, right? And so why we kind of want to be cautious about, oh wow, the city's collecting a lot of revenue. Not necessarily always going to be there, because it's a couple 100,000 coming in interest that probably won't be there in the next couple of years as interest rates go down again. As you probably see, if you have a savings account, your interest rate has gone up. Well, the city benefits from that too, especially if you have a big sum of money sitting in a savings account. We're collecting interest on that. So that's one reason we've been able to add more to our rainy day fund, for example, or our contingency, is having a little extra push into those areas when we have when times are like this, right? Save up for time when times aren't as beneficial. So this graph kind of follows this graph, right? So
how do we invest our reserves?
great question. So it's through the state. It's called the Local Government Investment Pool. And so it's I think, I don't know what the cap is, but we're way under the cap, but I think it's about million or something. Yeah.
50 million?
There you go. I don't know if you want to
I believe
expand on
it's
that,
somewhere
but
around there. Yeah.
yeah. But basically through the state investments, and we get quarterly reports on how we're performing.
Yeah, and
move money
it's
from the
currently,
LGIP to the
so it's
savings.
beating most other, CDs, right? It's at like 5.2% right now. So, yeah, it's conservatively invested, just as to kind of hedge any drastic interest rate fluctuations. But that is, it's part of our finance policy as well. And I think a lot of other smaller cities such as us follow along the same guidelines.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're not doing blue chips or anything like that, you know.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no Bitcoin.
Okay, another graph to look at here. I just took Portland's because Morrison doesn't do, you know, Central Oregon, but so this was a graph of a nearby metro area on construction cost index. You know, really we experienced a huge increase during COVID, right, with supply chain issues, especially were the main driver, you know, and slowdown in work. So getting equipment, steel, lumber, things like that. The good news is that we're now, you know, here, especially, I think Paul was at like 30%, you said, we're down from the peak. So, you know, equipment, construction costs, we're actually seeing that kind of level off and get more favorable. And actually recent bids, the roundabout, for example, came in under that engineer's estimate. So the climate for construction has gotten better from what we saw just a couple years ago, where we were all cringing and looking at rate increases and then looking at them again because, oops, we didn't get enough because construction costs went up so high. So that's, you know, a good sign that things are getting a little bit more normal on the construction side. And given inflation and you know, one thing that we're watching is all the federal money getting pumped through. Is that going to make an impact on, you know, how busy companies are for public projects and stuff? But there is a chance that things might slow down, and so that, you know, if we're positioned to go out for contracts, we might get favorable bids or continue to get favorable bids because they'll be looking for work. So I think Paul can probably talk a little bit more about that as we talk about capital. But you know, this chart looks better than other ones that we're finally seeing things get a little calmer in terms of construction costs. And then finally, development activity. I just want to touch on this a little bit because something I like to look at, an indicator, is how much general fund subsidy is going to development services. In our case, we do a lot more in development in our community development department because we do code enforcement now and a lot of our long range planning. This community invests a lot into long range planning, visioning, comp plan, housing plan updates, all these things that we've been doing over the last few years. And now we're starting just now our UGB process, which is a huge lift for our community to go through. A lot of public engagement, a lot of consultant dollars, but a lot of staff time too. So, you know, we do invest a lot into community planning. I think that's a big value for Sisters and a place to you know, spend money on to make sure we do it well and make sure the community is included in that. But I look at this more as an indicator of where we at with our fees. You know, during the kind of big growth in development, we're collecting a lot in land use fees. We're seeing that soften now as big projects have kind of rolled through. We're in the building phase for Sunset Meadows, for Woodlands. And so, you know, in terms of land use applications and the fees associated with that, we're seeing it kind of soften a little bit again as kind of land has been built out. But one thing I kind of want to look at over the next year is just where we compare with fees. You know, what does it cost a developer to pay for a subdivision application here versus other communities? Are we in line? I know we don't charge for pre-apps. That's a huge amount of staff time that's involved with working with, you know, developers even before they submit an application. We're not getting any cost recovery for that. So I do want to look at this department, make sure that we have adequate cost recovery for the services that we're providing. So that's something that I think that we'll work on this year and maybe bring back next summer. And then there's your map of the UGB kind of radius that we'll look at through this process that is just starting. So
Back to that.
Yep.
So, for the purpose of those who haven't seen it before, the kind of blobby green area is sort of a radius of 1 mile or 2 miles from the city center.
half a mile and then 1 mile.
Yeah, and so that's sort of the, kind of what you look at when you go talk to the consultants as to where the UGB might expand into. And some of that land obviously is not really available to us, but that's what that kind of a metamorphic blob looks like. Is sort of the, well, we could maybe, so.
Yep.
Just to be clear on on how we deal with developers as far as expenses, it's an advantage for them to work with us because we're not charging for several services that we provide personally out of the city? Is that?
Oh, well,
something-
it's always an advantage for developers to work with us. Catch issues early, right? Make sure that their application comes in as complete as possible. Make sure that they're proposing something that is, complies with their development codes, consistent with the community's values and things like that. So we strongly encourage pre-applications. We don't require them, which most communities with major, type 3, type 4s will require pre-applications and require a fee, because just getting ready for a pre-application, because they'll submit an application for that pre-app with what they propose. That takes staff time to look at that, to look at the code on kind of a preliminary analysis basis, and then meet with them for a couple hours to go through kind of, what are you planning to do? How are you going to do that? Oh, did you think about this? But there's a lot of time that goes into that, and we're not recouping any of those costs. On the other hand, that's a nice service the city's able to provide and pay and just cover it with general fund support to make development better, right? But there is some projects where they don't come in for pre-ops, and then we got to just work with what they submitted, and then you got a lot of back and forth happening and incomplete applications. So this is something that we just need to kind of look at.
Thank you.
All right. Council goals. So the council, the budget process really starts with goal setting. I mean, it's always ongoing, right? State of Oregon makes us do this on an annual basis, but doesn't mean we, aren't collecting revenue and paying expenses year round, and things change and everything. But really, we do goal setting in the start of the year. So this year we did a town hall, we did an online survey. The council got together for a full day to kind of talk about goals and talk about ideas that they have, talk about what staff sees on the horizon, and what projects we're working on and where we're at with them. So we go through the goal setting process, and that really feeds into the kind of the meat of the budget. Besides kind of just the ongoing stuff, it's like, what are the one-time expenses, and what new initiatives are we doing, and how much are we spending on projects this next year? So I wanted to cover, several of these goals. It's in the budget message, the major expenses or the council goals that have expenses that are tied to them. So I just want to touch on some of these, and feel free to ask questions, or I'm sure staff will highlight some of these as we go through the budgets. But that UGB amendment, it's going to go through this next fiscal year and then beyond, I think, into the fall of 25. So this is it's going to span 3 fiscal years project. We have $100,000 grant from the state to help support this work. So we've budgeted $170,000 in community development for this next fiscal year. We'll probably have some expenses then carry into the next fiscal year after that. But that's in the community development department. The Affordable Housing Grant Fund, we budgeted $182,000 as a preliminary grant award. The council's heard or received an application, and they've had a workshop on the application. So we budgeted 182, which is the balance of what was in the Affordable Housing Fund, plus 20,000 from the Housing Reserve. And you might have noticed that back in that chart, for all the general fund reserves, we replenished that 20,000. That was something I think the council, the budget committee did last year. So we're just continuing to put 20,000 in that. And that could be a decision point for you all to decide if you want to put more there, keep it there. But it's just another amount to kind of sweeten the pot for affordable housing projects.
The Affordable Housing Grant Fund, is that 0.33 of 1% on the transient lodging tax? Correct?
Yes.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And then Dark Skies implementation. So we've updated our code now around dark skies. Staff are working with a small committee and interested parties in the community to help implement and do public education. I think what we're sort of looking at for this next year is how do we educate the public, kind of get compliance without a lot of enforcement. How do we enforce? Is it complaint driven? We're on a 5-year clock, so everybody needs to upgrade their fixtures and make those changes within the next 5 years. So how do we implement that? How do we enforce that? Do we incentivize? So some of that money that we're putting in the budget, could that be like we do with water conservation, we have fixtures or suggestions or rebates for people to come and get fixtures, or, show receipts for electrician costs or something like that, demonstrating that they've come under compliance with our dark sky code. So that campaign is going to kick up this year, and at the same time, we're applying to become certified as a dark sky international community, which is amazing. Did anybody see the Northern Lights, by the way, here? I couldn't stay up that late, but um, on the wildfire mitigation community resilience goals, we're striving for this summer to get in front of the council the building hardening building code updates, and also defensible space codes. So not a lot of costs other than staff time on that front, but there is an option, I think, for the Urban Renewal Board to think about, especially in the urban renewal district, is there grants or things like that that we want to look at as incentives for people to invest in building hardening and defensible space in that urban renewal area. The Sisters Area Wildfire Mitigation Group continues to meet, and I think they're working right now on more public information as far as evacuation and emergency preparedness. I think something that we'll be looking at this year is emergency preparedness fair, or having a community event around that for wildfire preparation, to get information out, how to have a go bag, what are the plans that the city has and what our partners have. And then wildfire resiliency projects. This number's down from the last couple of years because we've done so much, but we still have a few projects left in that plan to complete on our public facilities. So that 17,000 is a culmination of multiple departments and what remaining kind of cleanup work that we have. Economic development, we do have a department we'll cover about economic development for Central Oregon. We have a 3-year contract with EDCO to provide economic development services for Sisters and Sisters Country. So that's a continuing goal for council, is to invest in that and continue the work on our traded sector development. And then in this goal, we also put the Northwest Housing Park Master Plan. Probably know that we have about 2.3, 2.7, how much acreage? Somewhere around there. Okay. 2.5 acres at the Woodlands development that was dedicated for parkland development. So we had an initial concept done for that that land at the roundabout at the Woodlands development. Our goal here is to engage the community in master planning that site. There's been the talk of, is it recreation amenities there? Is it more of a tourist park, or is it more of a community park? So we have some work to do to kind of flesh out how do we develop that park? What does the community want there? Does it support tourism with some kind of recreational amenity, like an ice skating rink that also supports recreation for our community members, children and teens? So we budget $100,000 in our Parks SDC fund. We are seeking a grant from the state to support that planning work. All right, the big one is essential infrastructure. So like I mentioned before, we're doing a lot of capital projects now in our water and wastewater. This is coming out of the master plans the council adopted last year for our water and wastewater master plans, and the CIPs that are in those plans. CIP is Capital Improvement Plan. On the water side, we're starting design and construction on improving well 1. At the same time, we got improvements getting started on well 3. The 2.2 million gallon water reservoir we'll be starting design on, and that's coming out of water SDCs. And then the Edgington Road transmission main coming down off of the reservoir site is also getting under design. So you'll see in this first year, we're doing a lot of the design engineering work, and then the next couple of years after that is when we really start to spend the money as we start the actual construction. But some of this work is actually slated to start construction as well in the next construction season. On wastewater, a lot of investments here as well. The Rope Street Pump Station, I think council will be looking at the design contract on Wednesday. So we'll have that in front of them already to get get under contract for the design. So that's a sewer fund project. The West Side Pump Station, which is a project that's funded both out of the sewer fund, but also out of the urban renewal fund because it's a capacity building project that supports development in the downtown. So we have 100,000 budget out of the sewer fund, but I think there's 500,000 in the urban renewal agency fund, which of course is a separate entity that we'll cover separately today. And then the Lazy Z Phase 1, exciting to kind of be moving forward on that plan, which is an awesome sort of community amenity, both to take care of, things that get flushed down your toilet and go down your shower drain, but also the potential for, pathways and wetlands at the Lazy Z. These first phases, I think, is like the pivoted irrigation that will be going in, which just kind of supplements how we get our treated water out to the fields there and use our effluent in a way that's more sustainable. Like I said, we'll probably cover these projects in a little more detail too, and you have plenty of time to ask more questions, but I just wanted to highlight these. Love to see investments in streets, especially the Elm Street pathway will be a huge community amenity for people to get up to the trails through town. So planning to move forward now. The council gave direction, grant or not, to move forward with building a pathway down Elm Street. That's budgeted out of the street fund. The Barkley to Sun Ranch pathway is also coming out of the street fund. That's another high priority pathway project the council adopted a goal around. We have the McKinney Butte safety improvement project. So we got a whole campus of schools over there and, a lot of development, a lot of growth in that area of town. We've had public comment and concerns about making sure that we're have a street design that is safe for pedestrians and bicyclists and kids walking to school. So we plan to move forward with that project. And then the big one is the Barclay Road Phase 1. So with the completion of the roundabout, we're that much closer to the alternate route for commercial and truck traffic to come out of downtown and using the alternate route on Barclay using the roundabouts. That kind of hinges on making these improvements to Barclay Road, which Phase 1 will reconfigure the intersection at Locust and Barclay, and then starting the realignment of Barclay, straighten it out, slow it down, having the pathways, the 10-foot, is it 10-foot or 8-foot? 10-foot multi-use pathways along Barclay too. So that's 1.1 million. It's a 2-phase project. We hope to get the next phase in either the next year after that, depending on collection of SDCs and where our street fund stands after that. But that's going to be kicking off this year. So good to be moving forward with that. Another council goal. And then finally, we have the final payment on the Locust and US 20 roundabout project, which they're working on it. It'll be mostly open by Memorial Day, with the work being carrying us through summertime to kind of complete the project on the south side. Okay, good governance. Another goal for council, we're always striving to have efficient, effective government. One of the ways that we do that is make sure that we're communicating well and engaging our community. The Civic Leadership Academy is wrapping up the first session here. Okay. The first cohort is underway right now. They have a couple more sessions before they come in front of council with their findings on the city's communications and engagement, and they'll have some suggestions on ways to improve, how to reach audiences that we haven't been able to reach yet. So that's something that's budgeted to continue. We have another cohort scheduled for the next spring. Yeah, and that's something that's supported through a partnership with PSU and then the Ford Family Foundation grant. We're continuing to work on our communications. We have a goal here to implement a communications plan that I think will take into account the suggestions from the Civic Leadership Academy. We've been working on things in terms of just public information, like our newsletter, but also things that we want to engage the community with more. So on the kind of dialogue, we've talked about having city manager and council coffees. We've have a goal to do at least 4 town halls like we did with the goal setting, but have different topics and opportunity to have just to sit down with city council instead of kind of the formal 3 minutes at the podium scenarios that we run into a lot with public hearings and those type of more formal engagements. So we do have a budget in the council manager department of about, I think, $10,000 for that kind of work. And that can be catering, that could be renting space, technology, surveys, things like that. Just kind of a catch-all to beef up our communications and engagement. And a couple projects, I almost forgot this bullet. The other night, the council heard a presentation on our new community park across the street that the Sisters Park and Recreation District is working on. We'll be supporting that through a partnership. The council gave head nods to include an amount in the budget. I think the ask was for the funding gap of $125,000 to help support some of the amenities at this new park, including pickleball, open spaces, a brand new playground, the walking paths. So these projects are all consistent with what we heard through our parks master planning process. So the council gave the head nod to include that in our parks SDC funds to support that partnership. So we have $125,000 budgeted in the parks SDC fund. And then these last two projects or goals are more staff time. We're going to be working on a public art program. We're not sure exactly what that will look like and what it would cost, but this community is all about the arts. And I think the city has an opportunity here to lean into public art. What does that look like? How do we support that? What does it cost? Where do we put public art? If it's sculptures, is it murals? And so we'll be working on options for creating a program around public art. And then the facility naming policy is kind of just a good governance thing to help the council, kind of name our new facilities that are coming up, right? We're a growing city. We have new parkland. We have a building called the Main Street Building, but it's not on Main Street. So, we have an opportunity here to kind of engage with the community, come up with a policy that makes sense, that honors, what the community is or what our, major landmarks are, and, have a process for how we name our new parks and facilities. Whew, okay, almost there. Environmental sustainability, the one thing I wanted to highlight here in terms of the budget is a major project coming out of our street fund. So again, the street fund balance is showing that big decline because we're executing on so many big projects now. But the East Portal Phase 1 is slated for construction. We're about 99% done with the design now. Basically keeping intact the original concept for that mobility hub that will include a dumping station for RVs, but obviously park and rides, bus stops, and then the EV charging is the big part of the environmental sustainability too, not just the park and ride and transportation hub. So that's all in the first phase. It's supported by a grant from COIC. With some city matching funds. So that street fund of 880 is actually kind of a, it's a grant funded project with 800,000 from COIC or 880, 850? Total 980. Oh, 980. Okay. Right. Okay. Great. So that's going to be under construction next year. So really excited to see that move forward. That has a couple more phases, future phases, more EV chargers. I think expanding on the bus drop off and things like that in future phases, but it'll be pretty substantial to make some improvements there. These other options or these other goals are really not coming out of the budget as a one-time expense, but things just that we're working on with staff time. The Urban Forestry Board's working on the heritage trees policy for the city. And then we're working with Republic Services on the future of our recycling center, which you didn't know, the city actually owns a recycling center, which is kind of a legacy of a bygone era. And so we've been working with Republic and the county on what is the future for curbside services and the future for the recycling center here in Sisters as we look at some of the new policies and regulations coming out of the state now with the Recycling Modernization Act. What are we going to be required to provide in terms of things like glass recycling, and how does the recycling center fit into that or not? So council is going to be looking at some options this year, probably even starting this summer, if not earlier, and having meetings with Republic Services about that. What does that mean for the budget? Not much, except for potentially franchise fees being collected on increases due to changing services or things like that, but nothing to really point out in the budget that to note yet. Okay, I'm almost there. Thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully this has been informative. Other highlights here, I wanted to mention that we did increase the budget for community services grants, or community grants out of the city council, city manager budget. We bumped that up to $30,000. I think this has been something talked about each year, and every year we get more funding requests than what we have budget for. And so as the community grows and as we continue to get more requests for grants, we felt like, well, we have the capacity in our budget to increase that up a little bit. So happy to hear your thoughts on that as we work through the budget. And then I wanted to point out the police services and DCSO contract I mentioned earlier. Show the trend here a little bit on where we started when we executed a new contract with the sheriff's office for increased services for our community. We have an escalator in the contract, so every year it goes up. Something that we discussed last year was adding a fourth deputy. We went through a year where we had some vacancies with DCSO in terms of their patrol staff. We kind of looked at the level of service and we looked at what their proposal was for the cost of adding that deputy. And Joe and I kind of talked about it, and we talked with Lieutenant Davis and Captain Bailey, and we felt like probably the best route would be to maintain where we're at currently with our current budget and the 3 deputies plus the lieutenant, and start the negotiations for the new contract, because we're about to come up to our 5-year point, which is the conclusion of the existing contract. And so looking at the 4th deputy and looking at the cost of the contract as we negotiate a new 5-year contract was probably the best way to go about it. They're also going to have a new sheriff, this election. So, something that we felt like, well, maybe we negotiate that with the new sheriff when we get to that point. So this is where we stand in the existing proposed budget is about $800,000 for the current level of service. I just kind of put a WAG as a projected going forward based off our conversations and what we can expect if we add a deputy plus some pretty hefty cost escalation. It's a union shop, obviously, so there's negotiations that happen. And when you're in a high inflation environment, cost of living adjustments were pretty high for police departments over the last several years. So we can start to anticipate that we'll have a much larger contract cost for DCSO, given that and the 4th deputy. That being said, we have built in a public safety reserve fund to kind of start building that cushion into the budget so that we can weather that in the future. We didn't want to have a huge shock to the budget in our general fund when we execute a new contract and it's like, oh, we got to come up with a couple $100,000. So we built that cushion into our budget to kind of anticipate and plan for that.
Point of clarification, do we pay for the school resource officer?
No,
No.
we don't at all. Yeah,
So they're not included in that, the number of deputies?
No.
no. A lot of cities share that cost. But given that we don't run our own police department at school district,
We also don't pay for the West District officer either, which is also part of our area. So
right?
we were paying for that before, and that's how we came up with, that was our only expenditure on police before this contract was signed. And it was like $500,000 or $600,000 for 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So this was a big win at the time of the new contract. And I would like to remind people that there are cities like, I know the mayor of Gresham from my Oregon Mayors Association contacts, and 90% of their budget goes to fire and police. And, ours is, I don't know what the percentage is of 800,000, but it's not anywhere close to 90% for our operating budget.
Well, and I would add that occasionally I'll have citizens or others approach me and say, well, why don't we have our own? It's costing a lot of money. And they have no concept that if we had our own, that wouldn't be a $1 million number. It would probably be closer to a $5 or $6 million number by the time you equip, pay the insurance, hire the personnel, manage the personnel.
And
I think
reserve.
I think this is still, even at this cost, a bargain for the city. And I want to recognize the work done by prior councils to move away from that West deputy concept to what we have now, because it works and it works well. And I wasn't a part of that, but I sure was happy to inherit it.
Anyway.
Right. Just one last highlight to point out. A couple investments that we're making is looking at our technology and security. we might have reached the point where looking at cameras in some of our parks and facilities, we've had some issues, as all cities do, especially in a tourist town. A lot of people coming through. That maybe we start looking at some, enhanced security at some of these facilities. So we'll be exploring some, estimates for that. So I included a little amount in, I think it's in the finance and administration budget.
That and maintenance, yeah.
Yeah, and maintenance. And then on the technology side, we need to invest in some new phones. We've had a couple of issues recently where the phones aren't even working, and they're pretty ancient. So we're getting some bids and looking at different options for what kind of new phones. Either if it could be all cellular, it could be just upgrading the our enterprise um, phone systems, but we'll be looking at that and making those investments. We need to have working phones. And then HVAC at the operations center, I think is due for some upgrades. So that's been budgeted as well. So good to see we're investing in our facilities, and that's not on top of the fact that we have a capital replacement reserve fund too, which is again a wise fiscal move for the city.
Jordan, for
Yep.
those of us that remember plugged phones into the wall with push buttons on them to go to the 3 or 4 different lines, and those phones work forever. Modern phones are basically small computers, it's voice over IP or something like
Yeah.
that. And just like the standards change for your home internet and the standards change for your cell phones, the equipment becomes obsolete and ceases to function properly because the new protocols aren't recognized by the old phones. Is that an accurate statement?
That's the problem that we have. It's that and the software to back that up isn't supported anymore. So we're having to do all these like workarounds and things like that. And yeah, it's time to come into the, yeah.
Jordan, as far as the HVAC, you said for the operational center, what is considered the operational center?
Oh, sorry. We're the Public Works Operations Center. So
Okay,
just down the street, down to the sewer plant basically is where it's at.
thank you.
Yeah. It's got solar panels on it now. Okay, so I can move into urban renewal now. Technically the budget committee has 2 hats. You have the city budget committee. There is a separate, agenda and meeting for urban renewal. So maybe this is something that the chair. Alternatively, we can leave that towards the end and just do the presentation on urban renewal after the city budget. Okay.
That would be my preference, just because you've given us an hour and 15 minutes of fabulous details that I think people would like to move through the process of asking questions.
Right.
And it would create a distinct break between the 2 agencies.
Sounds good. Okay. So, yeah, we're ready if you are to move into, Joe will cover more of the details on revenue expenses, and then we'll go by department and do Q&A and all that.
Okay. Before we ask for public comments, you've been here 10 months?
Yeah, July. Yeah.
I'm really impressed with your understanding and your depth of knowledge about the city operations and funding. I'm
Thanks.
not pleasantly surprised, but I am really amazed.
Oh,
No hesitation, you knew all the facts.
I have a great team. So these
No,
guys
you
and
do.
gals. Yeah.
And I appreciate your visuals. So that was very nice. And with that, are there any public comments, Rebecca? Any in writing?
Shocker.
Oh, I was just putting up public comment. That's, yeah.
Face there. You can see me double.
None online?
Everyone wants.
Okay. With that, I would like to go ahead and take, we'll say a 7-minute break. If you could be back here at 10:25, and we'll start with a budget presentation from Joe that has A through J. So be prepared.
Be very prepared. And I'm just up here and I've got a laser pointer too. So I'm really dangerous. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on page 22.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll try to remember to have a fun reminder. So also as Jordan explained, that's those projections have been beaten almost every year with about a 6.1% average increase in assessed value. So, the 5.8 is going to probably be fairly close. And then that also comes with like a 95% collection rate, which we've seen pretty standard. Even through COVID, there was 94 to 97% collection rate. It varies a little bit, but not a whole lot. And collection rate meaning people paying their current property taxes or not. So obviously that's a general fund income item, very impactful to the general fund in terms of income. It creates quite a substantial amount of income for the general fund. The second thing is transient lodging or room tax. We've kind of had those two names intermixed throughout the years. We might have a goal, as I've talked with some of you, to have kind of maybe one term next year. We'll see if I can be that brave, but I have a hard time getting rid of the word room because we've had it for so long. So as Jordan said, we've had a little bit of a decline this year in lodging tax, about a 4% decrease. But, and I think that's been experienced statewide. So I don't think we're kind of an outlier. But with that, we've still tried to kind of conservatively project into next year. So we incorporated that 4% increase and another about a 1% decrease. If we were a little bit more reliant on that as a revenue stream, I think, maybe we would keep it at that 4% decrease. But, just above $1 million at $1.05 million, we feel is a prudent spot for that lodging tax.
Joe?
Yeah.
The new RV park, is that part of the property tax or the transient tax or elsewhere?
So that is, it's part of the property tax currently. As that got a major improvement to it, it would increase the assessed value of that property. And it would also go for the lodging tax if they had.
So both.
Yep, it would be both. Yeah.
Are you referring?
You're referring to the proposed
Yeah.
Conklin property there?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that what you, yeah.
Yes.
I think half the property is actually in the urban renewal area. So that the increase in the assessed value of that property developed would go into the urban renewal
Yep.
tax increment.
Didn't you just, okay.
Yeah, the northern part of the property is not. So that where the Conklin house is actually outside of the urban renewal district. There's actually line is drawn there, splitting that property in half.
I thought you said that both of them were paying urban.
Well, after looking into it, they are, but everybody pays into urban renewal even if you're not in the district, because it's part of the overlapping tax. You're in the overlapping tax districts that,
Okay.
yeah, not to get into
I
the.
thought north side of Berkeley was the URA boundary.
It stubs out there just barely.
Interesting. Learn
yeah.
something new.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the map is in there. I don't remember the page number, but we can take a look at that in the URA.
See, we should have talked to the URA first.
Right, that's right. Okay, some other license and fees. Jordan also talked about these planning and inspection fees combined. Those are projected to be $100,000. I'm on page 23 now. Make one note. Business license fees, we expect to be fairly consistent. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the finance department presentation for some exciting developments in that area. And park user fees. Park user fees are mostly for our Creekside Campground. They're also for public event fees. We had just a kind of conservative projection next year for public event fees. But for our park fees, they are actually now over $300,000. So we, the city council and staff have invested a lot in that park, and it's paying off. We're almost at a point where just that campground alone can subsidize our parks department for the whole city, which is pretty cool. So that, also impacts, park maintenance, of course, and our ability to maintain a lot of parks that are not always used by residents. So we're fairly proud of that.
And we collect TLT there also, don't we?
That's correct. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. We pay ourselves in TLT. Yep. So you mean $30,000 of lodging tax from that park is included for sure. State shared revenues also, as Jordan mentioned, those have gone up a little bit, and that's largely because of our population. So that's always a per capita or per person calculation for gas, cigarette, liquor, and highway tax. And lastly, before I forget, interest. So Jordan also mentioned that we're expected to get about $1 million fund citywide for interest this year, which is substantial. But as we do a lot of these projects and we spend a lot of these fund balances down, we expect that number to be about 2/3. So we projected about $630,000 city total in interest. So you'll see that throughout the funds is the projected for this current fiscal year is extremely high. And next year it's going to be a little bit lower. Some other funds that aren't as affected by that is the general fund. So try to do a little bit of science as to, if there's a big project or projects in a certain fund, how that fund balance will be affected and in the relation to the interest that's allocated to it. So, so you'll kind of see that throughout the presentation as well. And then some other special revenue funds, local gas tax, state highway gas tax have been talked about, in franchise fees as well. All healthy revenue sources, especially for the street fund. As Jordan said, you don't always see that going towards the street fund. Typically, the general fund takes a lot of that in order to subsidize other programs. And then lastly, the parking district funds, so just at the bottom of page 23 here. Parking district fund is more or less the downtown core, and when a business pays their license, if they're in the parking district, they pay 5 cents per 100 cubic feet of space, and that contributes to park improvements. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of the future plans for that fund as we go through it a little bit later. Okay, right? Am I off on something? Per square footage, yeah, not per 100. I was thinking of utility billing.
And it goes towards parking improvement, not park improvement, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank
Yep. So flipping over to page 24 with system development charges, or SDCs, this is kind of a neat summary of those. You'll see those adjusted a little bit this year as, with the master plans like Jordan talked about, you have updated SDCs. So our water SDCs went up significantly per EDU or per meter size. And but some other SDCs remained relatively stable. Also with the calming of development, we're projecting kind of a conservative SDC income for this year. So you'll see that as well. But this chart is a pretty good summary of kind of all the SDC funds combined. 24? Sorry.
Yeah, I was pointing out that minus 55.43 is supposed to.
Oh yeah, that was a great Easter egg catch by board member Cobb there. I think that's when I put in a new column, I don't think the formula carried over. So
Yeah.
that'll be updated in the final budget document. And then lastly, as Jordan talked about as well, is the enterprise funds. I'm on page 25 now. So enterprise funds in terms of the utility rates going up. So the most significant here being the volume rate. So, each billing customer pays $1 per 100 cubic feet of use, and that is proposed to go up to $1.24. So that'll be incorporated with some of the rate increases, and also to contribute to water conservancy causes. I think that's all we have for revenue, major revenue. Again, those will be talked about a little bit as we go through the respective funds, but that's kind of a brief overview of all those significant numbers. Does anybody have any questions about any of the revenue?
Joe, I was just going to point out on page 20 that
Yep.
there's talking about the taxes being billed in late October and can be paid in thirds.
Yeah.
Not all the dates are there. It's just 2 of the 3 dates.
Oh,
It looks like that sentence got cut off on page 20.
okay.
We need to add May 15th
Oh, yeah, you're right. That's another great
and
catch.
February 15th is missing.
Yeah. Yeah, almost looks like here they don't have the option to pay on May 15th.
Yeah, Joe, and if you don't mind, on that historical TLT collection, it'd be great again to have the STRs broke out.
Yeah, I will do that.
I
Yep,
think it'd be
course.
really interesting to see how that is going up and down or.
yeah,
Actually, as we have discussions around those very topics as a council, I think that information is helpful, not just for the budget committee, but also for those of us on the council who think there's a solution when there may not be, or think that there isn't a solution when there may be.
And great for the public to see as well,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
yeah, of course. So on page 26, talks a little bit about what Jordan covered already in terms of the proposed additional FTE or full-time equivalent. You know, and with that, we have very minor allocations. So allocations as in, you know, one employee is allocated to several different departments or funds. We try to be as accurate as we can with those allocations without adjusting them too much year over year, just to create a little stability and kind of funds and projections and things of that nature. So that additional FTE will be in the water, street, and sewer funds, and I'll talk about those as we go through those funds. But you'll see, you know, a significant impact to those personal services line items as we go through those funds. And some other things that that have already been touched on, you know, health insurance up 10%. So that's something that City County Insurance or CIS comes out with in February of each year. They kind of put out a not to exceed percentage which is what we go with. And so we use 10%, and they came out with some actuals. I think is going to be about 9.45. So we'll be a little bit below, you know, what we budgeted, but fairly close. And you know, they're a pool provider. Pool meaning, you know, all of the cities in Oregon are incorporated with all of the impacts to their insurance program. So they go and try to buy insurance for all these different cities, and you know, various things like claims, different hospitals or care clinics, some of which they've had trouble with agreeing to terms, affect those rates quite a bit. So that's just a little information on healthcare. PERS remains at the same percentage as last year. You know, they'll have some projections coming out here soon for the next biennium. We'll kind of pay close attention to that. Obviously, it's a big impact, and the city picks up those percentages for our employees. Our employees do not pay their individual account program or IAP, which is usually 6%.
All right, can I go back to you're talking about page 27, but on this page 26 here.
Yeah.
Full-time equivalents per 1,000 citizens. I kind of have a question for you and the city manager. Just,
Sure.
Is there a certain level of, you know, full-time equivalents that's kind of a standard or a benchmark that we need to be looking at that overall? And do I need to worry about it, or is that mostly you need to worry about it, or is it all of us together?
Oh, always all of us together. No, so this is more, these charts are interesting. It's more for our purposes, just kind of look at how our staffing levels are compared to our community growth, right? And, but it's really hard to do apples to apples with cities, right?
Okay.
So for example, we contract for a lot of things. We have a lot of special districts. Some cities are full service cities, have police and fire, which have a lot of staff. So these numbers are wildly different depending on what city you're in. So this is more of us monitoring just like, what are our staffing levels? It's a way to communicate to the public in terms of, you know, this is the capacity of your staff. And, you know, it is something for all of us to kind of monitor that. We're up to 4,000 people now. Like I said, a doubling of population in, you know, about 10 years, with more phone calls, more calls for service, you know, more questions, more policy considerations. And this is something that we have to be mindful of and watch as, you know, those demands go up, our workloads could go up, that, okay, well, you know, maybe we do need to add a body here to kind of help with that workload. And how does that balance with technology improvements and all that stuff too? But it's more of a way to kind of just see that trend and see.
Yeah, it's our own benchmark is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
fine. Great, thank you.
A side note, the city did a survey online maybe a month ago. I think, Rebecca, you can correct me on the numbers. And the question was, how many employees does a city of Sisters have? And the answer at that point was like 18.5. And most people, I believe, said 50 or more, which is mind-boggling to me. But the quality of service that people receive for 18 and a half employees is just overwhelming, and they have no perception of the contracted work, but also the workload that the employees are carrying. So I thought that was really an interesting survey question for the public.
And I think it's interesting that on any given day, you can go around the city and you see city employees, public works in particular, in different parts of the city doing different jobs. And then 20 minutes later, that same employee is somewhere else doing a different job, but people look at it and they think it's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of people out there working today. Well, there might only be two. So
Yeah.
we may need to have employee number one stenciled on the back, that that's
Oh.
employee number two. But
Oh,
I think that
jerseys.
it's a public perception done by the fact that we have quality workers who do quality work and really interact with our public in a good way. And that's not typical in every city that I've been involved in.
So this is not a typical community or special, and I think also the factor here is how big the daytime populations are in the summer, right? With the influx of tourists and things like that. So honestly, having 4 police officers working in a community that's 1.8 square miles is a lot, in my opinion, but it's needed because our population is that much bigger from tourists, from people staying here, from people coming in for business and work and things like that. So we're more of one of those communities where it's not a bedroom community that people disappear during the day, that, our demands go up as people come in. And then some of that's seasonal. We staff up a little bit during, the heavier seasons to accommodate that. But yeah, people don't realize they think of this as a bigger town because there is such a nice downtown and bustling activity and stuff. It's like, no, we actually just have 20 people doing all these
And
services.
one more comment on the PERS rate. One of the benefits of contracting out police services in particular is that PERS number for us is significantly lower than it is for other entities that have both fire and police, because retirement age at 20 years, retirement 20 rather than 30, and it really bumps that PERS number up.
Yeah, it does. And
Lot.
in addition to that, you have what I'll talk about right now is insurance. When we were kind of evaluating the potential of having a police department, insurance was one of the main issues we were trying to analyze, and it would have more than doubled our insurance for obvious reasons. So, yep, there's a lot of benefit to that for sure. And so with insurance, just anecdotally, we had an insurance audit this year. So what happened was our insurance carrier came out and evaluated all of our buildings and our properties, and largely to make sure that the replacement value of those properties was correct. And the benefit of that was they analyzed all of the lists we have for all of our all properties, of course. But another the side effect of that was our replacement values went up, so therefore our premium went up. And so that, in concert with just the premiums going up overall through the pool, it went up about 23%. So I think about $20,000, which is a lot, and you'll see that as well kind of throughout the funds as those are allocated as well. And then in terms of workman's comp, we've several years ago we transitioned from city county insurance workman's comp to SAFE, the statewide insurance comp coverage, and that saved the city over $50,000 in 1 year, which was amazing. So it also attributes to the fact that we weren't getting maybe great value out of city county insurance, but that's neither here nor there. In addition to that, though, the city employees are very safety conscious, so we haven't had any, knock on wood, any significant injuries or events happen where we're having these big insurance claims which impact those rates significantly. So we're typically those rates, if they're at least a single digit, they're just going to go up by as much as your personal services go up. So those are estimated to go up a little bit this year, about 10%. So those are the significant personnel expenditures, and I think I'm done with that. And I can kind of go on to other major expenditures unless you have any questions. Okay, so other major expenditures, we can go through, again, Jordan kind of covered these, but we can go over a little bit of the city debt. So you'll see this throughout the funds as well. Not a whole lot of city debt right now. You have, the city hall debt service and the sewer SDC. So pretty favorable, really, with the refinance of 2016, fairly low debt, but we're expecting that to change as we go forward here with a lot of these projects in the coming years. And then URA debt, which is also on page 29. Get down there. We'll just talk about that as we go through the agency. There's a little bit more dynamics to that as there has been in prior years, so it's probably worth explaining in the URA budget presentation.
In terms of debt, when we were talking about the overall view of the budget and the operating contingency of 3 months, sort of a supply, it's my experience, and Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, or Joe, that if you have a shorter one, typically you have to do short-term borrowing between July and November when tax receipts come in order to do your daily business of the city. And that has an expense with it. If you have approximately 3 months, most entities, public entities, can manage that period of time until the tax revenue comes in without having to do short-term funding. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, yep.
So that's one of the benefits when people say, why is that so big? That's one of the reasons why. If it was smaller, it would cost us more to provide the services we do because we have to borrow and then pay that back as well as interest, so.
Yeah, that's why you'll typically see an operating contingency of like 3 months and a reserve future expenditures at 4 months to kind of gap that. Yeah,
That's very typical in all the public agencies I've been involved in.
Right.
Except for the ones that didn't have a budget and then.
right. And again, to Jordan's point, that we saw that a little bit for these highly volatile revenue streaming communities during COVID. If tourism and traveling stopped, obviously during COVID it was for that reason, but could be for wildfire, any other catastrophic event. If you're relying on those income streams, that could be a problem for your operations. So that's why we build in a lot of those contingencies and reserves for that reason, because we still have those contracts to satisfy. So. And then other major expenditures, reserves, which, we covered, I think, thoroughly in the budget message. Unless anybody has any questions, I can kind of start kicking off the departments of the general fund. Sound good?
Okay, I think so.
Okay. So going through, also page 32, just kind of talking about the budget summary. As you look through the book, I would say page 32, 33, and 34 and 35 are really good snapshots of the entire budget citywide. So, it's just a very high perspective of personnel for each fund, for materials and services for each fund, reserves, capital improvements, any transfers, anything like that. That's just a good scope of what we're looking at for the budget, and also gives you the final budget number too, which is kind of handy. So those are just really good reference sheets.
Joe,
Yeah.
on page 33, gotta put my glasses
Yeah.
on. Just for historical purposes, the jump in the total requirements for fiscal year 2022-23 actual, and then the budget, the jump from 8.3 to 32 million, is that all?
Yeah.
Capital projects that?
Good observation. So keep in mind, we're not spending reserves. So when you have an actual profit and loss, the actuals are not going to include the reserves. So in order to have that balanced budget, you're going to have to include those reserves in there. And then when you have the actuals, it just omits those.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
Is the tourism reserve part of the rainy day fund or?
No, it is not. The tourism reserve was put in place kind of when we were contemplating the Explorer Sisters or the destination marketing organization. So as we didn't allocate any tourism money for a year and a half or so, that reserve was building up. So we wanted to kind of memorialize that instead of just having it in a reserve for future expenditures or something like that.
Because the monthly payments kept coming in, but we weren't. getting
That's right.
funds to the Chamber.
Correct.
So that tourism reserve isn't on page 31.
Because we don't have one for this year.
Oh, we don't have one anymore.
Correct. Yeah. So, all of the restricted tourism dollars have been spent, and that's even after getting, the Explore Sisters up and running, because there was more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just thought it was really interesting that when you look at personnel services on 33, you compare it to 2021 actual, it is almost doubled. Basically in 4 years.
Yeah.
We only added 2 positions, I think.
Yep.
Time.
Well, yeah, that is a good observation. I'm going to go to page 33 as well. And I will say that historically, let's see what, historically, and this is a couple interesting numbers. So you look at this $2.6 million from last year's budget, but we project to be at 2.2. So, you know, we historically hit under that number by quite a bit.
Sure.
You know, but yeah, I agree. I mean, you're talking PERS, health insurance, workman's comp, you know, cost of living adjustments. Yeah, it's,
Yeah, so the inflationary increases in the last couple of years is one factor why you see the year over year budget increases, but then the actuals also reflect vacancies, right? And then budgeting the 3% COLA or merit increases and things like that. So there's naturally just kind of a little bit of a differential. We don't budget to the very
Sure.
penny in personnel,
Yeah,
which
that
is a
showed- that showed
it's
up somewhere
okay.
else in here where it was almost across the board, it was always budgeted much higher than the actuals, but
You can't overspend
yeah,
by law. So there's always underspending, and you also don't want to develop a use it or lose it sort of mentality, which I don't think our department heads have, which is a good philosophy and a good culture to have.
yeah,
So
I just thought it was such an interesting
yeah,
metric of
it is. Yeah, it's significant.
small period of time.
Yep. Okay, so if we're ready, let's kind of kick off. Let's go to page 39. That's the council manager department.
Under the
Look
general.
at all these graphs.
right.
And I have it up on the screen as well. Okay, Jordan?
Well, I'm back. So what we'll do is kind of go department by department. Feel free to ask questions on each of these department budgets or when we get the funds too. One thing to note with FTEs is that we do allocate FTEs across departments based on how much time is spent within each functional area. So the 1.3 kind of reflects, portions of staff that are allocated to this particular function. Sisters has a council manager department. As we grow, we might want to think differently about how we structure the general fund, different departments. It always messes up history and it gets confusing, but basically this department houses expenses for the city council plus city management and the CMO department. So a lot of the kind of catch-all stuff falls into this department for the general fund. It hits a lot bigger than most cities in their city manager department because it includes things like our community grants, loans to urban renewal, which really inflates this department by about 500,000, or if it does by 500,000. And then the affordable housing grant programs in this department too. But really, this is your very general government, feeding the council and trainings for the council and any membership fees. And then some of those council goals that are more not specific to any other department or service area that we work on, like the public art program or the community leadership academy, falls under this department. So to highlight a couple of the expenses and some of the changes I kind of already talked about a little bit here, the community services grant. And we can go to page 40, just looking at the table. I might need to get a ruler or glasses here, but I'll touch on public outreach, $65,000 we budgeted there. Really this gives us the capacity to implement some of these council goals around community engagement and public outreach. So we have some funds in there, some ideas about, having enough money to pay for a facilitator for conversations around the homeless and working with our agency partners and nonprofits and the community and discussing what solutions would be community supported that will work in Sisters. And so I think we put $10,000 in there for facilitation, meeting rooms, catering, things like that to kind of have those community conversations this year. We have the $30,000 there for the community services grant, so we bumped that up by $10,000. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And we'll keep looking at that. I think, again, as the city grows, we have such a great volunteer network here and so many nonprofits. It's hard to keep track of all of them, but I think it's one of those feel-good things that we put tax money back in to the community, working through our nonprofit and other organizations that would do work here. Another way to kind of extend what the city does to serve our public. So 30,000 is a great investment for that stuff. And I suspect we'll continue to watch that and see what grants look
I,
like.
I
So,
think we had 60,000 in ask last year or so for 20.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, not all of those are actually, served directly, sisters.
I mean, yeah, we evaluate them, obviously.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. There's a whole process, but, and, other things that we, wanted to know too, the 65,000 for public outreach also includes that Civic Leadership Academy spring cohort. I think it's 25,000, to continue that work. I think we front loaded a lot of the grant in the first year. Yeah, so, we're gonna continue to support that for this 2-year program. And then finally, we have 15,000, also earmarked for, additional community engagement, town halls, surveys, buying people coffee, things like that for doing these town halls. So, a little bit of a sort of, we're not sure exactly what things like public art may cost. We're not sure exactly what the community engagement in these new public events will cost, but we wanted to make sure we had some level of appropriations in there to be able to accommodate that for the city council to execute on those goals. And then finally, down at the bottom, the affordable housing program, that 182 I mentioned earlier, using what had been built up in the affordable housing fund to award a grant, which is a pending for Habitat for Humanity. So that would include what was the balance of 162 plus the 20,000 that was in the extra housing reserve. And so that expense will come out of this department as well. So that's your mayor, council, and city manager department. Questions? Yeah.
Fund 740. Education, is that for staff development or is that for community outreach?
That is staff.
Thank you.
And real quick, I just want to make a reminder that the city council, our planning commission, and all of our other boards, including the budget committee, receive $0 out of any, there's no money in the budget for that. We don't get paid. There's no checks written to any of us up here. We're all volunteers.
Is that why my check bounced?
Your check for 0, we're going to triple your pay. Okay.
Great point. Personnel services does not include city council, right? So we're a city that's all volunteer, elected officials. We have an internal sort of work plan to look at comparing other communities, look at what a council compensation or stipend would look like. That would be something similar to what Ben's working on right now that would be implemented for future elected officials. The council had a little conversation about that at goal setting. So I know that topic has come up before. It's there's sort of this progressive movement to look at this in terms of fairness for people to be able to, hold office with childcare situations, the amount of time on somebody to, volunteer. Is there a way to, compensate for that time to offset some of the impacts of serving your community? So we'll be looking at that. No formal proposals yet or anything like that, but gathering some information for this council to consider potentially. But that would be implemented in future fiscal years if there is a movement towards that. And we'll do public outreach around that too, because it's a sensitive political topic, that it's hard for a city council to talk about their pay, as someone who's serving their community and volunteering for the community.
Speaking on sensitive topics, for 10 years, as a council member and as a budget committee member, I have always stated the fact that as a taxpayer, when I give money to a nonprofit, that is my choice as a taxpayer and my private home budget. If I give money to Habitat or church or Boy Scout, to then pay taxes and have the city give out my taxes in grants to the same nonprofits of their choice rubs some people in the community the wrong way. And so for 10 years, I brought that up. This year, I ran the numbers, and Joe will have to correct and make sure that they are right. But looking at the general fund of $4,248,920, if you back out FAN, the community grants, housing reserve, affordable housing, that's like $237,000, which is 5.57% approximately of the general fund. So I propose that going forward, council and staff come up with a percentage maybe of the general fund that they're willing to give out in grants. I know that all the items listed that you want to fund with grants are anomalies in some years. Affordable housing grant won't go out every year. But as a taxpayer, when I look at this, I go, money could be spent on a capital improvement. It could be spent on something different in the parks. It could be reduced for my taxes. You might want to look at what percentage of the general fund you're giving out in grants. Just a thought on my part. When you add in the URA and the total city budget, the number decreases to 1.92%, which is more palatable. But you might have a perception issue going forward.
Good point. A lot of communities have something like community grants or municipal grants. In some ways, we could look at the criteria or, look around what are these grants and what services are they providing. In some way, you look at it as a way to supplement what the city does. Instead of the city doing it directly, you get better bang for your buck, so to speak, by having a nonprofit provide that service. Otherwise, it may be something that you have to deal with as a city and spend taxpayer money on that could be more expensive because public employees are doing that service rather than volunteers or a nonprofit that is out there picking up garbage that otherwise we would have to pick up, right? So it in some ways, it might be an investment for something that cities may have to do already.
And maybe there's a way of showing that in the budget process, because we had an interim city manager, Rick Williams, years ago, Rick Allen. And he and I went round and round, and he said, Nancy, this is the best use of $10,000. You get community input, you generate goodwill in the community, and it gets work done that the city doesn't have to do. But when it becomes such a big percentage of the budget, I think that it needs to be justified in a better manner perhaps. And I feel good because we gave out $5,000 to FAN to pay the water utility fees or whatever it is. Just a community member at large comment.
Appreciate that.
What would you consider a big percentage of the budget then?
I think 5.5% handing out is a big percentage.
Curiosity, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, Nancy. You and I've had this discussion more than once. And I don't disagree with you. We probably need to think about how we can be more transparent and how much that's going to be. The 500,000 for affordable housing, that's a pass-through grant, isn't it? ARPA. So that's not,
I didn't count that in.
okay. I thought I heard you mention
No, it was
so.
the 400,000 for the URA dropped it down to 1.92, but the rest was all on page 40, line item 790, 792, 797, and on page 31, the housing reserve of 20,000.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's where I ended up with the 5.57, but I could be off, and I'll leave that to Joe to look at later on and readdress if you guys want at council level.
And you bring up fairly interesting points for us to chew on. I mean, it makes me wonder if, something we could do better is in the process when we are, passing money on to taxpayer dollars onto other organizations, just making sure our vetting process is better. There's certainly stories all the time of some organizations not operating above the board, and it's easy to read an application and think, oh, they're doing great work. And then, find out a year or two later that all that money was going in somebody's pocket. So I think that might be one way to mitigate for it, as well as if this is something that we want to continue and does take up a fair chunk of taxpayer dollars.
Well, we could also look at making a priority based on what Jordan was saying, a priority for projects that do work that we would end up doing if the city would end up doing if it wasn't a volunteer effort.
I think what I hear Nancy saying, and I think it's worth some thought and consideration, is that we, the council, make a decision to allocate dollars to organization X, whereas a citizen might choose not to allocate dollars to that particular organization because they may feel it doesn't do the work they want it to do or whatever. So it's a tough one. I mean, we're elected to make those decisions. And yet at the same point in time, we have to be cognizant of the fact that those dollars are not coming out of our personal pocket wallet. It comes out of our tax bill, and that represents everybody in the community. And that any of these organizations may not represent everybody in the community. So I think that's what I hear you saying. And I think more accountability and taking a look at it makes some sense. So it doesn't grow and begin to become bigger and bigger and bigger and more part of it, because it's in little small pockets.
Right.
And unless you add it all up, you don't really see it.
Is there a accounting way to maybe create a grant fund and just move one chunk of money over to a grant fund, and then the grant fund itself is where it all gets allocated out of it? Is there I don't know, is there a way to do something like that? I mean, future years, not necessarily this year, but,
Potentially.
you know.
Like a separate department or?
Yeah, that way we can have one allocation out of the general fund, and it's capped at whatever percentage it goes into a grant fund, and then we figure out how to divide it up later and where it all goes. And I think that might provide the, kind of the transparency is that, hey, we're sending out 5% if it's capped at that or whatever to this grant fund. And then from there, we say, okay, in the grant fund, we have the housing grant, and that may or may not be dispersed. If it doesn't, it gets a little interest, and I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm not saying I have the answer. Does that sound kind of like what the?
It does, and I didn't want to sidetrack the whole discussion. I'm sorry, because
Yeah.
you guys can massage this later on, but the percentage of general funds, I think you, as council and staff, need to say, we're not going to expend more than X amount. And
That's
you've
what I
got
heard you
to
say.
come up with what is fair. I believe that 5% is way too high. So I don't know where we were in the process here, Jordan. I'm sorry, I kind of hijacked your.
No, that's okay. Yeah, we can, yeah, definitely look into that. I think for like the affordable housing program, for example, like
Yeah.
part of, like he mentioned earlier, is part of that is supported through restriction from TLT, right? So,
There are anomalies in there, but.
yeah. And I would tie it to like the operating budget too, because, there could be fluctuations. So it'd be percent of total operating, general revenues coming in, like property taxes and TLT and stuff.
All right.
Maybe worth discussing.
There's
next
definitely a
week.
demand out there, I would say.
Yeah, there is.
I have a quick question for Joe.
Yeah.
That I didn't ask you before.
Sure.
So sorry. So we in the past didn't have any funding for elections, and now we're every other year designating 1,000. Is that what we're doing every other year, or are we just designating 1,000 year after year now?
No, that's usually every other year.
Okay.
And if we, leave a little bit in there for, whatever reason, then that's kind of just a placeholder.
Well, I think
Sometimes that
I think
goes-
it's a good idea. Sorry.
Sometimes those dollars are used if we're running a bond campaign or something like that, where we actually have to pay the state to have those things
Right.
in the budget book, and not the budget book, the voters pamphlet. That's the word I want. So it's kind of a placeholder, but I have seen in other organizations when there's a significant bond measure going out or construction or something like that, where it's going to have a hit on the budget, that number may be significantly higher in any one individual year to cover the cost of this to the city of hosting that election for their own funding and those sorts of things. But it's not to pay for us to be elected. It's really to pay for those sorts of functions that are part of a city, where they have to pay the state in order to be a part of the voting process.
But there are administrative efforts
Of course. Yep.
by the city for when we run for office. Yeah.
I think the most recent example would have been the charter amendment
Yes.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the finance department. So I am on page 41. I'll try to speak in this a little bit better. So it's been an exciting year for finance. So finance takes care of accounts receivable, accounts payable, utilities, a myriad of other things. And the reason why I say it was exciting is because for a few reasons. Number one, we moved from a hosted server here at City Hall to a cloud-based server for a lot of different reasons, security, costs, to name another one. We also did that with our accounting system. And there was a lot of teething with both of those transitions. And we also moved to a utility billing platform that's hosted by our accounting system. Might not seem like a big deal, but it was an intensive amount of time that and effort and energy that went into it, continues to go into it by mostly Kim, but myself as well. But we've seen a lot of benefits from that. Utility customers can see their consumption from month to month. That'll help with some of these new water rates and the volume rate changing significantly. Um, it's a little bit easier to use and some other nice tools. In addition to that, we are incorporating other payments that can be made on that platform, like business licenses, other fees that we have as a city. People have been asking about that, and for us to try to do that for them. So we've accommodated that. So it's pretty cool. You'll be able to pay your license fee, and for a city this small, it's kind of significant for us. And some other things that we have for next year, upgrading. There's some Microsoft licensing that's kind of expiring, so we need to replace workstations because of that. So we have $15,000 actually for workstation replacement there, and then we have a few other things, supporting the new utility rates when those are put into effect, just to kind of monitor those, make sure that all those income items are meeting the projections that we need for reserves with any kind of borrowing, kind of pursuant to the rate studies that we've conducted. And in addition to that, yeah, phone system like Jordan talked about, and kind of monitoring some different utility policies that we are kind of updating. So exciting stuff in the finance world, of course. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So we're on to maintenance. That's going to be on page 43.
I did have one question about the
Yeah.
spreadsheet. I'm just curious, the line item that's property taxes,
Yep.
what is that payment?
Yeah, so that's for the chamber. So the Chamber of Commerce, because it doesn't have governmental employees in it, we have to pay the property tax for that. And for the cell tower site at First Street Park. So we have typically two property taxes that we have to pay. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah,
What did I
Main
say?
Street building.
You said
Chamber?
You're
Oh.
Yeah.
referring to the-
That's
the
correct. The
makers-
to be named. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Wait a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, it was on purpose, yeah. Of course.
A verbal Easter egg, so to speak.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh,
Okay, so I think as we go through my funds, we'll tag team this with Joe, and he can answer any questions on the personnel end or the revenue end as we enter the enterprise funds and the SCC funds. And then I'll take care of the materials and services, the contracted services, as well as the capital outlay. So we'll both be chipping away at this. So for our maintenance department, which is set up to maintain all city facilities, mostly buildings owned and maintained by the general fund. But also we play a role in our water and wastewater and street departments as well in those facilities. So the first objective this year is to do the HVAC upgrades at our Public Works headquarters, which is up at our treatment plant. That's where our operations are based out of. We have a shop up there, and then we have a headquarters building, which is has our offices, our administrative equipment, our break room, lockers, bathrooms for the crew. That's what runs out of that headquarters building. Very important to us. Then we're gonna continue our wildfire mitigation plan on city-owned facilities. We're gonna be doing some work down here at City Hall, as well as to our buildings up at HQ, at headquarters. And we got security camera installations at critical public buildings, looking potentially at a couple of our parks where we've had vandalism issues that we need to get better security with. We're gonna look at security at our headquarters as well as potentially recycle center, so. And then we have a couple truck and equipment procurements that we're going to be doing, and those get spread or allocated to the different funds based on the employee that uses them. So we're replacing a utility truck, and so you'll see that repetitively through 4 or 5 funds that they are allocated to.
I have a question, if I can.
You bet.
With these security cameras, could they also have a dual purpose with online marketing or social media marketing, showing events in town? Are they going to be that kind of cameras as well? Or is that a completely separate system you'd need?
I think we could look at it. I would expect they're probably separate,
Okay.
you know, I know you have in mind, like the webcam sort of thing.
Yeah,
and
like
whatever, yeah.
showing weather conditions at the beach or showing what's
Yeah,
going on in
yeah.
Sisters downtown or whatever like that. Okay.
I mean, that kind of oversight does provide, it does provide some level of security, right? You're on camera,
Right.
but in terms of backup and recording and all that stuff, probably want to.
Probably a different system. Okay. That's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
We will have a brand new camera on our new roundabout, so
There you go.
I'll be able to see both directions when you go on to ODOT Trip Check.
Yeah.
See who's speeding. Keep your stopwatch out.
Right. Yes.
Hopefully see who's not speeding, right?
All right. Okay, moving on to page 45.
Okay, I have a
Oh,
question
sorry.
Actually, couple of things, on line, Fund 726 contracted services, those are the custodial maintenance that goes on in the building and others? Is that what contracted services is?
Yep.
Okay.
And also contained in that is that wildfire strategy that he talked about.
Fund 781, I'd like to see a name change in future budget.
Oh, yep. Of course.
And then Fund 797, this is sort of a procedural question. That's a line placeholder that hasn't had any budget in it recently. Is that just a placeholder? Is that something that is now antiquated and should be removed from our budget line?
Yeah, you know, I will share my worksheet. Don't copy it, but it is out of that worksheet. So
Okay.
the final published budget actually will have that line item removed.
Thank you. I always look for those things that kind of.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. No, thank you.
Let's get rid of the receptacles, 797.
Yeah, that was a find and replace there, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was what it was for 797.
Receptacles. I was gonna ask what that was. That's the Easter egg.
Proprietary.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's where all the receipts go.
That's right.
And on 743 electricity, I don't know if it's another fund that's parsed out or not, but, just curious what the impact of the PV system is having on electric bills at HQ.
A reduction for sure.
Yeah. do you-
Yeah, you'll see it more in the sewer fund.
Sewer fund?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to see where that would show up, so.
And it's important as you see, you know, the reduction in, or even keeping it flat
Yeah.
with our electricity is, you know, we're still dealing with an increase in pumping. We've got more water coming in, more wastewater going out that we got to dispose of, but those electricity costs are staying flat because the efficiency upgrades that we've been making. Then I'll provide little detail on line 906, the capital outlays. So 29,000 is for the HVAC equipment at HQ. Proportional share of the utility truck is 5,000 to this department, and then 7,000 for security upgrades.
What page was that?
Page 44,
Oh,
line 906.
Oh, thank you. I didn't look far enough.
So you basically added up all those things, come to 41, is that correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Any questions for Paul, or are we moving to tourism with Jordan?
You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
So I'm actually going to take the tourism
Okay.
setting. So there was a couple questions about what that tourism fund was earlier. I just wanted to address that department was set up in 2020. At the same time, we set up an economic development and a law enforcement departments. And those are our 3 biggest contracts, I believe, from the general fund.
Yep.
That we have. So we wanted to separate those out. So that's why those were initially started. And with the tourism fund at our department at that point, we had decided we were not allocating all of the funds to the destination marketing organization. And so we had some funds sitting in reserve, and it was where we started the process to kind of do our separation from our past Destiny Marketing Organization, moving into the new DMO. So that's why there were reserve funds in that department for a couple of years. Starting in 2022-23, we started working on the Destination Management Organization, Explore Sisters. They are now completely sustainable and on their own with their own active board. And through contract, they do receive a flat $350,000 of the transient lodging tax. And then they also will receive anything over that 33%, that's restricted, that the city brings in. So they could potentially get more than $350,000 if the transient lodging tax is healthy and being brought in. So that's contract is for 5 years. As a note, Nancy Conley, Mayor Prieden, and myself are all on that Explore Sisters board. Nancy as a citizen, and the mayor and I as non-voting members, to just kind of see where they're going and where they're headed as they begin to grow. So they also, just as a note, also hold reserve funds in their budget, which they, when they first started, having come out of COVID, where a lot of those organizations struggled because they didn't have funds to continue, and they lost staff, and they lost kind of that momentum that they had. So they also hold reserves so that they can move through any smoke event, different things, fire event, any, whatever we might have. So there's no FTEs in this department. It is really just a fund holding fund, but we do have some goals around what this department can do, and we will continue to maintain involvement with Explore Sisters, with counselor and staff members serving, again, as non-voting members. We continue to focus on improving the visitor experience and livability of our residents with the development of a master plan for the future Northwest Park, knowing that will help both tourists and our residents. And then as we explore the public art program, it will really, I think, can help enhance the cultural vibrancy of the city. And then I'm going to go back to kind of the objectives. For one of them from the year we're currently in is, and it was talked about the capital improvements and what can that help. And I pulled a couple things out that could and will help the visitor experience. One of them is the East Portal Mobility Hub is in design. We know that will help with parking, that will help with moving people through the city, and the same with the roundabout. We know that the flow of traffic can be a deterrent for tourists to come to town and people to come to our city. So with those capital improvement projects, we think there'll be some help to our basically helping people flow through town with the tourists. I might have Joe talk to the contracted services and why those have changed a bit this year, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Joe.
Yeah, so we'll go down, let's see, to page 46, that's gonna be on a line item detail here. It'll be easier for everyone to see that. So, yeah, as Carrie spoke about, there's a $350,000 fixed contract for, to the DMO, for tourism purposes. But then they also have keep in mind, it's all restricted dollars. So we have an 8.99% lodging tax. So 30% of that, 8% goes to the restricted for tourism fund or line item. But then the other 70% of the 0.99% also goes towards that. And that can be significant. It's about $70,000 a year. So, as we project out for next year and the end of this year, that's why that number is about 392. And if you kind of back into that number, then you can kind of see a little bit over $1 million of lodging tax. So that's kind of the background there, with the 399 and the 410. So $410,000, meaning, we're just trying to budget conservatively. Not sure if it'll hit that number as high. We kind of escalated that a little bit just to be conservative, but that's why you see kind of the 399 and the 410 on that line item. It's actually 726 there.
So even though you're projecting around possibly a -1% in actual income into TLT, you're actually projecting it just a little higher.
Yeah.
As far as this fund, just to be conservative, right?
Not only that, but I mean, not to get into the process of things, but we're not going to get that number until the middle of July. So,
Right.
So we're trying to make sure that we don't get in budget trouble, right?
Overlap. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
And at 3 years, there was a 2-year budget renegotiation. coming up this year, next year?
No, the contract is for 3 years with a potential 2-year extension. So that can mean a number of things. It's not necessarily a full negotiation. It could be that we continue on as we are, but both parties will be part of that process.
Thanks.
You'll be part of that.
No. Don't know.
I guess we'll see.
We haven't experienced that yet.
Right.
Yeah, baby board. All right, any other questions regarding tourism? Or on Parks Department with Paul?
Okay, so if you look at the objectives for 24-25, you'll see most of these, actually, we're gonna get funded capital-wise through different funds other than our Parks Fund, but we included them in the Parks Department just because that's where the staffing allocation is, and that's where the staffing gets paid through. So we have the Northwest Park Master Plan we're really excited about. I just reviewed the grant application yesterday, and that's going out today, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. That's gonna be a master plan with a lot of community involvement, like Jordan was saying, for that new 2.8 acres that we have over by the Woodlands development. And then we have the East Portal Master Plan design actually going on right now this year, and then we'll have construction next year. So that's where the difference in the split of that 980,000 that came from our CET grant through COIC with 100,000 in 23-24 and 880,000 in 24-25.
And Paul, when you say next year, you're referring to the next budget year. Construction starting to occur.
Fiscal year
Thank you.
24-25.
That's what I thought you meant.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And then getting into materials and services, just a couple lines that I want to kind of the bigger ticket items, provide some detail to. So contract services, a large portion of that is we use contract restroom cleaners every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So it's a pretty good chunk. It's also, you know, we have a lot of trees in our parks, and we have to maintain those and manage those. And we end up paying for arborist services or city forester services out of that contract services for the time they spend in our parks. Dues and subscriptions, that's going up, which is actually a good thing because that supports our campground revenue. That's mostly for our campground software for reservations. And then the capital outlay item, again, is 5,000 for that utility truck that we'll be replacing.
A quick question on the names of these parks. Is that part of our naming convention that we've been talking about, as well as not just building facilities, but also names of future parks? Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Who wrote the grant application for the Northwest Park?
Jackson Dumanche, and did a great job.
It's the if you build it, they will come park.
Yes, yeah.
We see you coming in, we want to stop here, Park.
Any questions about that department? No?
Yes, on line 780, the credit card fees, 26,000. Is there any other alternatives of payment that could bring down that number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is, that's a byproduct, as Paul talked about with our reservation system. And coupled with, we have a kind of a cash-free kiosk there as well. And so that incorporates both of those processing fees. Not ideal, but unfortunately, especially with our reservation system, there's not, they're also the, they host the reservations, but they're also the payment processor. So they have us there a little bit. If that got too out of hand, we could always explore another reservation system platform. But we're able to at least absorb it with, you know, with the campground revenue. But that, so that incorporates not only reservations, but that kiosk as well.
What percentage are you hitting on those fees?
I know, I was just thinking about that. I'm not, well, 26, so I think it's around 4 or 5%, which is,
Sounds about right.
yeah.
What's in your wallet?
Yes. Have you discussed with your vendor that if people paid with a debit, there could be either a discount
Yeah,
Or a surcharge for a credit card, one of the two. That's what a lot of agencies are starting to do as credit card fees have gone up. And I know a lot of small businesses around town tell me they're dropping 20 to 30 grand a year in credit card fees.
Yeah.
And that's on a food truck.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they lock you in, just like they talked about. If you have a proprietary point of sale system with a credit card processor, then, you know, you're kind of backed into a corner, unfortunately.
But,
All right, any more questions, or are we ready to go to law enforcement with Jordan?
Okay, we are on page 49.
Page 49, just one page for a big service here. So law enforcement, I covered a lot of this during the budget message, kind of talking about the trends here and what we're experiencing in terms of staffing levels. You know, a couple things to highlight. You know, I think one of the things that we have the benefit of is a contract like this where, you know, for a city that's 1.8 square miles, 4,000 people, you know, we get an assigned lieutenant who lives in our community, who's community focused. I think they've done a good job of hiring deputies that have that same kind of mindset and want to work in a town like this versus, you know, go chase the baddies and, you know, be that kind of.
Show up here, though. They catch someone as they're driving through. There's been a lot of.
Well, it's because they're active. Yeah, yeah. You know, it's a kind of a trap. Yeah, there's been a couple, news articles lately about catching folks. But you know, very active in the community, very visible. I think that gives the community a sense of protection. You know, that they feel safe. They see the police cars, they see the deputies out there. We have the substation just down the road, which is a great resource for a small community to have a physical location like that in our community. In terms of the actual cost now, I told you, I mentioned that we're going to be probably playing catch up with kind of a lag in the, rising costs for personnel, especially in public safety services. A year ago, we talked about adding the fourth deputy, so we had preliminarily budgeted for that. And so the differential between the budget and our projections is the reflection of that. Where we had budget closer to 900,000. We're actually just paying for the 3 deputies and the lieutenant. We're also kind of in conversations about maybe realizing some savings because there was a vacancy for such a long period of time. So, we're looking at options for recouping some of those costs, either through how, overtime expenses are invoiced or in the next contract cycle. But they're fully staffed now. And like I said, we're going to be working this year with the new sheriff and lieutenant on renegotiating the contract, potentially looking at that 4th deputy, probably adding that 4th deputy with this contract. One of the things that I guess I didn't mention in advance of that renegotiation, something the city has done in the past is doing a community survey. So I think we'll be interested in doing another community survey, asking the community about what do they feel about public safety and police services here? What kind of priorities they have, and that will help kind of feed us into that negotiations and may probably reinforce the movement towards having that 4th deputy and more services covering more the swing shifts and around the clock service, because I think there is a period of time where it is just the West deputy in the middle of the night or whatever that's responding to the calls. Yeah.
Will that safety survey go out with the annual, or I guess every other year business survey?
Yeah, the business survey is another one that we've talked about that hasn't gone out in a while. I'm leaning towards you got to be careful not over surveying people too. And we've started talking about actually doing a community attitude survey too, just as kind of a community satisfaction survey. So we want to make sure that we stagger these things in a way that we're not overdoing it. We got the UGB coming up. We got a lot of community input that's going to be coming. So this seems to be a little bit higher on the priority, given that we're going to be heading into a new contract negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions on public safety?
Well, just to highlight what Jennifer said, and I think most of us know this in the room, but if you don't, we are designated by the state police and to some degree by DCSO as the place where they try to intercept individuals who are moving back and forth to the valley with nefarious intent because they can stop them up. San Am is their favorite place. They can stop them up there and they can't go anywhere.
And we're a funnel.
Yeah, we're a funnel. And so, you know, when you see these high felony traffic stops and everybody, what happened to Weimar? You know, that kind of a thing. In reality, it has nothing to do with crime in our community. It has to do with, our police services and law enforcement deciding where it's safe to make a stop of an individual they are concerned about. And a lot of times it happens somewhere in the Sisters proper or somewhere between here and San Am Pass.
The
It
challenge is
makes it
that,
look like we are really a bad spot.
Right.
We're not.
and the challenge is that, you know, the media will say
And sisters.
in sisters or sisters are, you know, that word, and if,
Yes.
you know,
Yep.
a Google search and you sisters, you know,
So you don't need to do any
maybe
survey,
that's
just ask
the
the
thing.
store sisters.
Maybe we can get them to call it the East Portal.
yeah.
No, we're renaming that, so.
I know, but I'm talking about the funnel, you know, we
Nor-
can call it. the East
Northwest
Portal.
County.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's also a fine line of like being stigmatized as a speed trap too, you know, which is good for the community. Like, yeah, don't speed and everything, but you know, you also don't want to be known as that community, you know, oh, avoid sisters as a speed trap. Yeah, but we do our fair share. Like, I think Lieutenant Davis told me the other day, I mean, they had one day where they, I think, pulled over like 30 people or something, you know, it happens. Watch your speeds, 20 miles an hour.
Well, I think, and there's other ways to mitigate that with our traffic studies and stop signs and, you know, the stop sign at, Larch in Maine is just like the absolute best stop sign we've ever put in because it's just,
Yeah.
it slows everybody down. And if, you know, in the future, if we need to get more stop signs, we can do that.
And,
So-
and I still believe with the roundabout construction that will trigger an ODOT traffic study to
Yes,
the east, correct? That's still gonna happen? So, you know, that's something in the future that will most likely drastically change our,
Yeah.
hopefully, speed limits and, you know, change that law enforcement responsibility, for better or for worse.
Cool.
Any more comments, questions? No?
Sorry, that's a good one.
All right, community development. Scott, hey, are you ready for us?
I'm gonna get the voice working here.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Community development consists of a department of 5 employees, including a director, principal planner, an associate planner, a planning technician 2, and a code enforcement officer. So we provide a variety of services to the community, planning wise, both with review of land use applications, what we call current planning, and then as well as long-range planning, which consists of that look out into the 20 years into the future and making sure that we're planning for growth accordingly, such as through updates of the comprehensive plan, looking at our housing needs analysis, the housing plan update that we did recently, and then looking at things that we've been doing to you know, improve our development code to make things more efficient, including some efficiency measures that we implemented several years ago to help make infill growth more feasible. But now turning our sights based on all that planning work to the urban growth boundary amendment that we just recently kicked off. We also, most of the lion's share of our building permit review services are contracted with Deschutes County, but we do our share of the planning level review of all building permits and inspections for occupancy. And then a couple years ago, we added our code enforcement officer. So that's, he's in the 2nd year of that program. And then we also support the Planning Commission and the help support the Parks Advisory Board as well. Some of the, you know, the big notes, big items of note for the upcoming year, as Jordan touched on. Obviously, what will be occupying a great amount of our time is this urban growth boundary amendment, and lion's share of the budget for our department is through the contracted services to help with a consultant on that project. I think what we're looking at for that is 205,000 or so. So that's a project that will straddle several fiscal years as it's going to take about 18 months to get it done. We did get a grant for that to help defray some of those costs, but we still have to budget those funds we have to front those funds and we get reimbursed later, by DLCD for the grant. So that's incorporated or shown into the budget here. Another big focus, in addition to some of these ongoing work plan items and council goals, some of them, we started working on last year with development code amendments on the short-term rentals and defensible space and things of that nature that just seem to take some time. So they tend to kind of overlap. But we did get the dark skies lighting code updated finally last year, and so that will turn our focus to implementing that code, which calls for a 5-year amortization period to bring all the non-conforming lighting into conformance. So that's a major task. It involves quite a bit of first community education on why it's important and what the ordinance says. So that'll be a major focus, but also looking at creating some funds that might be available for the citizens to help defray some of those costs of upgrading their lighting. And so we're looking at on the order of 10 to 15 grand in terms of creating that initial program, as council, I think, discussed as we were creating the ordinance, that they were interested in creating a fund that kind of help the community out with that. And so hopefully if that's successful, we see that as maybe an ongoing thing for the next 5 years and potentially increasing a little bit every year. And then also looking at potential changes to or upgrades, retrofits to public lighting that we might need to make to set the example to the community is also built into that. I think those are the major items of the budget. Any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to say that the dark skies and helping some of our community, it's an equity issue. We have a lot of fixed income retirees with older homes that have air bulbs all over the place, and just like we do with the water conservancy issue. I certainly support, we've talked about it at council levels in past councils and current councils, that we want to try and help out those that need it the most, right? So that's something I just want to highlight and just make sure we continue to do that, not just in dark skies and not just in water, but in all issues that we can.
Gary?
Well, I'm looking at public outreach at $1,700. Now that's separate from the UGB process, which has money built in to do that. Would this be utilized for instance, when we implement the dark sky ordinance to get the word out to the public as to what it is and how it's doing? Is that what that placeholder is for, or is it for something different?
Certainly could be used for that kind of education.
And I would like to encourage both the council and you folks to talk heavily about that idea of looking at those pre-planning fees. I think that is an area that probably we're being a little too generous.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have one. The county has laid off numerous planning department employees. Did that trickle down to our budget with them? It doesn't appear to have reduced our costs in any way.
I mean, I can, so yeah, they're reducing in force. They handle the building permits on our behalf, so we contract with them. It's really a pass through, right? So there's like an advanced planning fee, which really is like the building check and planning, building plans fees that then we send to the county to provide that service. We're still seeing some activity, right? But it shouldn't cost us any funds to have the county be able to provide building permit review and inspections because they collect a fee for those services. So yeah, I mean, they're seeing a slowdown both on the planning side and on the building side. I kind of gave you kind of the trends that we're watching here. We're still one of the kind of more bright spots, I think, in the county because there is building happening. And so they're getting permits, through the Woodlands and Sunset Meadows and stuff. But unincorporated county has definitely slowed down for Deschutes County.
So the advanced planning fee is the fee that we get back as part of the building. They collect the building permit fees at the point of contact, and then they remit that advanced planning fee. That's sort of our revenue for that.
Right.
Any other questions? No? Page 53, economic development. Jordan, just so you know, I'd like to get through the general fund segment before we break for lunch.
Okay.
Are you guys okay with that? Can you go another 10 minutes? 12?
I think we're super close. Economic development, great. So I mentioned that we contract with Economic Development for Central Oregon, EDCO, for this service. It's a 3-year contract executed just a year ago. So we're on the, I guess we amended our contract last year to add an additional 3 years. It goes up by 3% each year. So we've incorporated that escalator in there. So we have Eric Strobel, who's the manager for the Sisters area, Sisters Country area, does the majority of the work within city limits, but also we do get some county funds for the work that happens outside of Sisters proper, but also the county supports EDCO and does that through a grant. The contract or the total budget of 131,000 pays for basically that employee to provide economic development services. So that's focused on the traded sector. We talked about tourism earlier, Explore Sisters instead of in more of the tourism and retail and lodging businesses. Our economic development program is more focused on traded sectors, so jobs that are good paying jobs that can support folks that live and want to work here. I think what is their motto? Start, move, grow. Yeah, I think it's move, start, grow. Move, start, grow. So, the focus is, recruitment, retention, and growing businesses here. This year, they updated their strategic plan and just presented that to the city council about what the goals are to, start new jobs here, get more business investment in Sisters. A lot of people may not realize that just drive through and stop in the downtown, that we have a pretty thriving light industrial base here. And we're looking to continue to grow that by starting new businesses. So having somebody who is focused on that can work regionally and work with our state partners on programs, on incentives to attract businesses, provides hopefully a good return on our investment in that service area. A lot of it has to do with, meetings, consultations, working with businesses, uniting them, having networking opportunities to cross-pollinate with the businesses that we do have. We have a strong sector in sort of the what's it called? Alternative medicine or specialty food products, I guess is the better term. But other target industries, outdoor apparel, and equipment, advanced manufacturing, things like that, that we target. So this is a general fund supported operation, and it's paid for by, taxes and general revenues. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but one thing I like to do, and I encourage the rest of council, and I know some of you already have in the past and will continue to do so, is Eric has a lot of meetings with business owners and roundtables and discussions about things that aren't even specific to economic development, childcare and other housing things. And I know most of us have shown up at a lot of these meetings just to support, just to be there and be present. And I would encourage us all to continue to do that. It doesn't cost us a dime in the sense of money, but it's a big deal when we're out there in the public talking about issues that are connected to economic development. So thanks for everybody that's doing that.
Well, I would say, Jennifer, you can correct me if I got my date wrong, but I believe we have a pub talk from EDCO in Sisters in July.
Yeah, last week of July.
Yeah, and one of the things that they do is they rotate around to the different entities and they bring folks in from all over the county. And when they're here, they'll focus on a lot of the sorts of things we're doing in this area. And sometimes that drives business to us. So, I believe it's well worth doing, and we have a good individual representing us. So,
Yeah, and I'll just add that, Eric, our representative, has done a fantastic job, especially, being creative and helping with other solutions around housing and daycare and other issues. But I will say that the work that the city does and council and all we do to keep, everything we can do to keep this community livable is having an equal impact on these traded sector businesses, because a lot of them have been growing through growth spurts, and it's do we stay or do we relocate? Because there are challenges for sure of operating a growing business here. And, a number of them have, decided to stay and expand here, which it says a lot about the community, because they could probably financially be a little better off if they moved to Redmond or Lapine or Madras or something like that. But they're really dedicated to staying here, and that's because of everything else that the staff and everybody else does in this community. So
Yeah.
good job, everybody.
Yeah, economic development is an interesting sort of service because it's sometimes hard to measure. You have targets on recruitment, retention, and job creation and things like that, but there's a lot of proprietary stuff too that, leads and retention information and stuff that sometimes can't be shared publicly. And I think for us, it's pretty cost effective to be able to contract out for this rather than, have a public employee on staff to provide these services.
For the SCED membership program, is that something the business owners would become a member? And would there
Yeah.
be fees assigned to that?
Yeah, basically they're looking at their cost model, and I think this would help supplement their operations by going to a membership, a little more skin in the game sort of thing too for
Right,
other businesses.
As part of the Civic Leadership Academy, we had some assignments, and one of the stakeholder groups that I chose to interview were the business owners. And currently, as far as membership fees, there, and Explore Sisters, there's the Chamber, there's now the new SBA that's starting up, and then now I'm hearing SCED. They want to know who's doing what for them and what do those fees bring them. And there's a little bit of confusion as to each of those groups and what they actually provide.
Yeah,
Just feedback from.
definitely we hear that too. And again, a pretty vibrant commercial area with a lot of activity and a lot of nonprofits and things. So we do have the chamber. There's this other business group starting up. Again, economic development for Central Oregon is focused on the traded sector rather than kind of the more retail tourist base. Explore Sisters is not a membership organization. They're supported through the TLT, which is kind of quasi membership because it's hotels and motels and the campground and STRs that pay a tax, lodging tax, and then that supports that operation. So, yeah, it's a little confusing out there right now.
You can speak to that, but Scott, with Explore Sisters is, while that's a potential, is he really wants to stay away from that because he doesn't want to show the impression of favoritism, with, he's supposed to be kind of supporting everybody in the tourism community. So I doubt that will be an option in the near term.
That is, not on our workload at all for Explore Sisters. Funds generated through the transient lodging tax and the contract, that there's not a membership fee so that we can keep it clean, because any business within the city limits is automatically included in our promotions and activities that we do. And that was a complete break from the former contracted destination management organization.
Okay. That's
Well
good
said.
to know.
Thank you.
Yeah. There could be a perception that there is going to be a fee or something with Explore Sisters, and maybe it's something to just be aware of, that perception may be out there.
There could be in our overall overarching plan is there are some outlying areas like Hoodoo that's not in the city, or Camp Sherman. They have their own small DMO, and they have asked Explore Sisters about what can we do fee for service for you to promote us and manage our computer interface. And so we're in just a preliminary look. We have a small committee that's organized looking at that aspect, but it wouldn't be entities within the city itself.
Thank you.
My hope for all these organizations is that it's not necessarily a pay to play member, they're voluntary memberships, right? For the chamber and the business association, and then the same with the sisters area, economic development. So, there shouldn't be a requirement to be a member, right? These are voluntary. So in terms of impact on business and, their P&Ls and stuff, hopefully the cost of doing business in Sisters is still pretty attractive. And part of what Eric does is kind of work on the things that, overcomes hurdles like transportation and commute option for employees and expansion and things that Counselor Les was talking about.
And I would just like to add that, this council, I'm sure, is very, very committed to the concept of the DMO being a service that is provided to everyone in the community. And it's not a fee for service. And I think one of the reasons that we looked at creating this distinct organization was that there was a lot of gray area between the roles of other organizations that do charge a fee for membership versus what we were trying to see, which is if, anybody who runs a business in this town or represents the tourism industry in this town has a right to have their activities publicized in a manner that doesn't require them to be a membership of an organization. And I think that was really critical to us. And I think that's what Explore Sisters does. And, if you're hearing rumors that there may be a fee, I don't know where it's coming from, but they're not accurate. I certainly wouldn't support it as a council. Not that we have anything to say other than passing the money through, but I think there would still be discussions about it.
There would be, yeah. All right, any other comments about or questions for the general fund? All right, is a 15-minute break long enough for everyone to grab something to eat and go to the bathroom? We can work through lunch. Do you need longer? Do you need less? What would you like, starting with Gary?
15's fine.
15? Doug?
20 is better.
20? Everybody said 20?
17.
17 and a half.
15. 15, woo.
15's fine.
15. All right, we're going till 12:15. We'll take a break, grab some lunch, grab water, whatever it is you, and we'll start off with street fund.
Yeah.
There's no gavel. Oh, hey, there is. Wow. I didn't gavel to me.
I have to show you something.
Going to reconvene, and we're going to start with the street fund, starting with Paul. I hope you enjoyed your lunch.
We'll do a quick rundown of the enterprise funds, where we're at, where we've been. So, in regards to our large capital projects, which include our street fund, we've updated our master, we updated our starting construction on some of these projects. So it takes a while to get these things out of the ground. Everything's got to be in place. You got to have everything funded adequately. We did lose, I believe, 2 to 3 years with the huge inflationary adjustment that we saw through COVID. Now that we've been banking cash in these funds, we've been getting great interest rates, interest income on this cash, and now we feel like it's time to go to construction. Construction prices are dropping. We're seeing across the industry, we're seeing a lot of interest, not only with our regional large projects, but even our own projects of contractors from the Valley coming and looking at these. And these larger projects, we're going to see contractors throughout the Pacific Northwest, we believe. So competition is good for us. And so we're going to encourage that. We're going to advertise that way. So with that, I'll get into the work plan for 24-25. Obviously, we want to wrap up US 20 Locust Roundabout as soon as possible. I'm afraid it is going to drag out, through the summer. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a great improvement to our transportation system. Great safety improvement, efficiency improvement. And we were just talking with the guys that are working down in the East Cascade, Edge of the Pines, Timber Creek area this morning there's a lot of traffic down there that's not local traffic. And so it's gonna help that. It's gonna be more of an end user's game down there because you won't have the cut through traffic. People actually gravitate towards the Locust intersection, which they've been avoiding for years. So I think you're gonna see some unforeseen benefits come out of some of this transportation work that we're doing. Like I said, we got the East Portal Mobility Hub underway. We're at 90% design review. We're gonna run through Public Works Advisory Board as soon as we get the new drafting back. Get one more thumbs up from them, and then we're gonna be ready to get it in front of council and get the thumbs up to go to construction. So we're planning on starting construction fall of 2024. McKinney Butte safety improvements. Jordan mentioned, you got the new elementary school out there. We worked with the school district on figuring out how to get that multimodal access as safe as possible, not only to the elementary school, but crossing McKinney Butte, going between the schools, because we know kids and teachers and parents are going to be going to all three of those. So we got a great plan. We're just about finishing up with design. We got the cost estimate, and so we'll be going to construction this summer, hopefully have the bulk of it done before school opens in September. Barkley Drive Phase 1. This is the interim fix to the Barkley Locust intersection. It basically changes stop control, creates a through movement for the alternate route, slows people coming from the county because now they're going to have to stop. So, which I don't have a problem with. And then the long-term plan with that is an eventual roundabout that'll be in coordination with development through a UGB amendment. We don't know when that is, but we know with fixing the bookend at the east end of the alternate route, we are ready to do some improvements to make that corridor actually function the way it was planned to. And then we got a couple multi-use path projects. Both of these are high priority path projects. Elm Street is a connectivity project between Village Green, downtown, out to the Peterson Ridge Trail system, also to those southern neighborhoods and out into the county. So getting the bikes and the pedestrians off Elm Street or the side streets is just going to be a huge safety benefit. So excited for that project, and that will include a separate pedestrian bridge over Whitechoose Creek.
That was gonna be my question. I thought it did, but.
It does, yep.
Have those neighbors been notified yet on the east side?
At least twice through the design period, but we'll have another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hard
There's-
neighborhood.
There's some obstacles that we're gonna have to go around. People reconfigure parking. I think there's a wall tent where the path is going right to the middle of, so. We got the Barkley to Sun Ranch project. It's a connectivity project that'll basically create a full multi-use path system from downtown all the way out to the north city limits on Locust and Camp Polk. We have an additional bullet. This came in late. This is something I've been working on with ODOT. Cascade Avenue curb ramp project is already a project that's been designed and ready to go to bid for ODOT. And it's an ADA project. It's part of their ADA lawsuit that Department of Justice came back and said, ODOT, you have X number of years to replace every non-compliant ramp in the state of Oregon. So all of us have been to towns all over Oregon and seen the mess that gets made. And, there's a lot of improvements that have been made. Unfortunately, there's some of these ramps downtown that don't meet ODOT specifications, which are actually higher than the ADA specifications. They don't want any bricks in their landing zones. So they're basically going to be tearing up every curb ramp in the downtown area, which is going to take a while because you can't tear up an intersection at a time because you got to leave ADA passageway through the intersections. So we were working with our design team, our engineers, We went down and surveyed everything, came back with a much smaller list of what can actually meet ProAg. So our next move is to reconvene with ODOT staff, get a game plan on how we can minimize not only the impact to the downtown, but the impact to the asset that we have. Because we own those sidewalks. We own those curb ramps. So unfortunately, they abut a state highway. So we allocated or budgeted some funds to be able to go through that process, determine what direction we're going to head with it. We still don't know. And then if we decide to take control of those curb ramps and liability of those curb ramps, there'll be a need to come up with a transition plan that we can show to the to ODOT and the ADA advocates that we're going to replace X number of ramps in X number of years and that type of deal. So more to come on that, but there is funds budgeted just for that. And then we have our typical annual overlay, chip seal, seal coat projects. It's all part of our street maintenance program. We go through and it tells us which roads that are up for what treatment. We put together that schedule, the cost estimate, we take it to the Public Works Advisory Board, they review it, give us a head nod to move ahead, and all those projects are in the budget. So any questions on?
Couple on McKinney Butte is mainly a traffic calming and pedestrian safety enhancement project.
Correct.
And if we take over the curb ramps, are we also going to have to look at the ones that go east-west on the cross streets since they abut Cascade?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? I have, go ahead, Sue.
I was just gonna compliment you on coming under budget by 500K. Was, 540K, that's pretty good.
Yeah, so I think coming under or delaying or just saving for this year is what we're thinking. So again, trying to hit that construction timing, that's most a benefit to the budget and to our community is what we're trying to do. So.
Well, and I think it also represents what you said. There's not a spend it or lose it mentality on the part of our administrative team and our staff. I've worked in agencies where there is, to me, about 45 color laser printers that showed up on the dock the last day of the fiscal year.
Yep. Any questions on the revenue side of things?
I have just a comment about the funding resource of 3 cents a gallon of gas going into this fund. And this might not be the appropriate spot. It's kind of mentioned throughout the budget book about the council goal of putting in EV charging stations at all the city parks. And my question or concern about that is, if I have a gas vehicle, I'm paying 3 cents a gallon. If you are providing EV charging stations free of charge, I'm subsidizing the EV users. And where is there equity in that? Are we competing with free enterprise because Tesla is putting in 6 charging units at mainline station? Have you taken that into account? And is that a fair balance of using the tax from gas vehicles to offset that? Just for you to think about going forward and how you're appropriating those funds and if it is a fair use.
Yeah, I also had questions about that. I wasn't, I was curious as to whether there were any fees associated with the new charging stations or if they were going to be free of charge.
Which ones?
The ones that will be put in at the parks or.
I think those will be a fee station, will they not?
So still to be determined.
Yep.
In this year's budget, we don't have any funds allocated for EV chargers. We do have a grant that is going to pay for some at East Portal. We're working with ODOT on that. They're going to have a say about whether we charge or can charge or not, as well as CEC, because you got to think about, we wouldn't want somebody buying and reselling our water for more than what they pay us for it, right? CEC has the same mindset. So
Yeah,
all these things are new to everybody. And we're going to be working through them with you. But it's not going to affect this year. It's going to be something in the next couple of years.
And a couple comments, the Tesla chargers are 37 cents a kilowatt hour, so there is a fee on those. These out here are paid by the library, as you know.
Right.
One of the things that ODOT, that the state is doing, and I support it fully, is that to register my car is now $800. And that's to make up for the loss of gas tax. And it's based upon how many miles per gallon your vehicle gets. So if you have a Jeep that gets 6 miles to the gallon, you'll pay the basic registration rate that it's been all these years. And it goes up on a sliding scale depending on how many. That's what they're doing now. They are talking about requiring you to report your mileage each year and pay a fee based upon the mileage. That's a lot trickier because that doesn't count for out-of-state mileage. So then they want to put something on the car that tracks you. I'm not gonna let them track me, so I'll just write my check for $800.
Gary, that's a state fee? Is that,
State fee, the state's doing that and to recoup lost gas tax money.
okay, thank you.
And imagine the next session, this will be a
Oh, yeah.
topic that they.
And I'm not saying it's right, and
ODOT.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that's a real philosophical discussion we need to have, and I don't think the station should be free.
It's one of those conversations that
Yeah, I mean,
this
perhaps,
is not even in, it's,
yeah, perhaps CDC would, give us a little bit of a kickback since we are having charging stations that they're benefiting from.
they only charge 7 cents a kilowatt hour.
It is a philosophical question. I mean, it's
Yep.
something that the council has kind of dipped toes in a little bit with the environmental sustainability plan. And
Correct.
I hear you about the subsidy, but in some ways that value is that, taxpayers are subsidizing the fact that we want more people in electric vehicles, right? For quality of our air, et cetera, noise, all that, the things that come with electric vehicles. Now, how much should that subsidy be? The cost of putting in the chargers, which right now are pretty much offset by grants. And then, I mean, what is the right model? Should there be a surcharge, right, to pay for the wear and tear on our streets because people are driving electric vehicles, or the cost recovery of providing the power at least, right? And then, so I mean, we're kind of subsidizing the public good of having less greenhouse gases, in our community.
That's the biggest complaint I hear, however.
Yeah.
is Catering to electric vehicle users and what benefit is that make? So educational piece and
Mhm.
having a clear policy and stating it. Okay.
Also, if those EVs are covered with a solar, for the electricity instead of C, then they're paying for themselves.
Any other street fund questions for?
I just had a couple things I wanted to point out real quick. In the revenue section, you can see our gas tax again is trending pretty flat. Our franchise fees are a large part of that revenue stream. And the reason or the reasoning why they're showing up in the street fund is those franchise owners, their equipment, their piping, it's in our public rights of way. They're affecting our streets by doing street cuts, we have to manage around their infrastructure when we are putting our own infrastructure in. The maintenance of those things affect the street fund. So that's why we put the revenue in the street fund to help offset those costs that we occur to keep our streets maintained because of them.
Yeah, and looking further down, so we're on page 63. If we want to look a little deeper into the line items, you can see that $880,000 grant right here, and that's at line 3400640. So that's for the East Portal design and construction there. And then any other things of note, so we have kind of like I discussed before with the wages, so you can see the significant variance from budget year to budget year and personal services for that extra FTE that's going to be spread again across water, street, and sewer equally. And then other things of note that Paul's already discussed, one of them being all of these East Portal construction, McKinney Butte, those are all on page 64 in the cap outlay in that 3500906. right down here. And then you can see also where the infrastructure line item, infrastructure is for overlays. That's kind of just the exclusive line item for those. Or if you have any other questions about any other line items, be happy to field those. Yeah.
That to be a no. All right, street SDC funds going once, twice, 3 times. Paul.
65, page 65.
Okay, I'm not gonna reiterate the project's work plan. It flows with the street fund, so I'll dive into the capital outlay, the 1.573 649 on line item 07500906 on page 66. That 1.5 million includes 1.1 for Barkley improvements, and then the $473,000 contribution to the roundabout. So that's what's coming out of the street SCCs for cap outlay.
And that contribution is per the governmental agreement with ODOT. You know, we could see they're kind of funny on how they, you know, that money is going to be available to them, but they're funny on how the timing works for when they pull that money that's available to them. So, you know, we'll keep you all informed as to how that timing's working. I mean, that $473,000 might lag into the winter of next year. And some of the contributions that we've earmarked might fall into fiscal year 24-25 as well. So just like we usually do, we'll kind of keep you apprised of how those transactions are working and make sure that you understand, you know, the delineation between, you know, what is in the budget and what's going to be actually taken out by ODOT going forward.
Any questions?
Paul, as we get into some of these others, the SDCs, there's gonna be a split in cost between the general fund and the SDC fund, depending upon the nature of the project. Is that correct?
Depending on the funding source, yeah.
Park SDC funds, page 69, and Paul.
Okay, a couple of different projects we got on here that we haven't seen before. There is a park element to the Lazy Z Phase 1 improvements, which is the wastewater project out on the Lazy Z. There's going to be a wetlands portion of that property, and we want to allow the public to be able to interact, not swim, but hike, walk their dogs, enjoy the best view in the Pacific Northwest, as well as potential wintertime activities out there, you know, whether it's cross-country skiing or snowshoeing. There's going to be a 1 mile loop and a 2 mile loop, a series of ponds, streams, and then of course the wetlands. So part of that will be in benefiting the parks department, and we'll be using a small part of the overall cost of the project will come from park SCCs.
And
So
would that be allowed for dogs on leash or no, because of poop problems?
oh no, it's yeah.
Maybe dogs, okay.
Yep.
Can I recommend a disc golf course out there? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Some serious water hazards, but yeah.
Maybe
And-
the geese will move there.
I got it in there.
And then we got a contribution that council's got briefed on last council meeting with SPRD to help fund the pickleball complex over there, which is a great bang for the buck for the city for SPRD to take on that project. We had it in the Parks Master Plan at over $1 million. So $125,000 contribution is perfect.
And the best part is we don't get the complaints about the noise and we don't maintain it.
Yep.
And just to, oh, sorry. Just to highlight a couple things on, so going to page 70, kind of on the line item breakdown, you'll notice that the park SDC revenue is quite high. So when that park master plan was updated, those SDCs were then again updated as well. And they virtually almost tripled. So that's why, you know, you'll see a lot of these other SDC funds are relatively conservatively budgeted. This one is not, just because of the increase in the rate. So that's why you see the $450,000 there. And then also want to draw your attention to line item 12500906. So that is $150,000, and we've been for the SPRD contribution to those pickleball courts. We've been talking about $125,000 throughout this discussion. That $150,000 was baked in early in the budget process, so that was kind of more or less a timing issue. Likely that $150,000 is not going to be spent in its entirety. It'll likely be $125,000. Probably not worth it to change. It's not going to be lost. If it's not used, it'll just go into the reserve for future expenditures. But I just want to bring that up. You know, Jordan and Paul both had the updated numbers as of a week ago, but these are just a little bit older. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions about the line items.
Anybody? Okay. Parking district, on page 71, and surprise, it's Paul.
So real quick, it's an interesting fund. We've had it for, say, about 25 years. Was originally created to help fund parking improvements and creating parking in the downtown core. It actually does have a map for the district. And several projects have come out of this fund that have been constructed over the years. But really since 2013, we've been using this as a bank account to just save money for a future project, and whether that's an additional parking improvement in the downtown core within the district, or potentially help funding Adams Avenue and the parking element with that. So right now it's just acting as a savings account.
Adams Avenue is in that overlay area.
In the district, correct? Yep.
That was a question I had. I wondered about that.
Yep.
I find it interesting that in 10 years, I have only had one person ever ask me about the parking fund, and it was the accountant in with Peggy Tehan. No one ever asks what the money is for, where it's going to, or how it's being spent. I just find it mind-boggling that they're paying the tax and don't care.
Yeah, it's paid for some great connectivity projects. We had very few sidewalks on Main Avenue back in the day, and it helped provide pedestrian continuity all the way through that corridor. So we'll use funds when we're ready for them.
On page 71, your last statement there, staff recommends conducting a park study and updating the park master plan in coming years. Can you, Paul, do you have an idea of when would be a good future year to be slotting that in?
I think in the next handful of years, 2 to 3 years. It's really going to depend on, we're going to see that come out of a council goal potentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any last questions on that department? Comments? All right, City Hall Debt Service 73, Joe.
Yes, thank you. So on, page 73, thanks. Not the most exciting fund either, but it still has an important purpose. So this fund basically pays for the city hall's share of its debt, of course. And so how it works is the general fund and the other funds contribute to the city hall debt service fund, and the debt service fund pays its share of the debt. So pretty straightforward. And actually, we're getting close to the twilighting of the debt for this building. It's in 2028, December of 28, I believe. So that'll be here soon, and then this building will be paid off. So that's kind of exciting. But relatively small debt service obligation, $52,600.
Any advantage to paying it off earlier, or is it such a low interest rate? It's like, why?
Yeah, and it's combined with refunding bonds that we had in 2016. So it's kind of it's been consolidated. So it wouldn't affect it at all, because it's one debt payment for several things.
Okay. Thanks.
Any questions? All right, water fund, page 75, Paul.
This is getting into the good stuff. So everything that we've been dealing with water rates and water SDC rates and master plans has ended up here finally. We got $21 million in projects to do over the next 6 years. So we're gonna get started on them. First one is well one. It says construction. It's really a reconstruct project. Well one was built back in 1975. We've replaced the pump and the motor twice, but we still have the original building that was built by city council, literally, by Dave Moyer, literally, brick by brick. So we got our useful life out of the building and then some. We're in need of a much bigger building. So we're gonna actually demo that. We've done the design for it and we'll be building a new building that's gonna really look a lot like Well 4. If you haven't seen that, let me know. New equipment, new chlorination equipment, much safer equipment when you're dealing with disinfection of water. So great project. It's been, again, in the process. We did the design this year, construction next year.
Maybe we dub it the Dave Moyer Building.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Go
it'd be
through
great.
the naming policy.
So I won't go into this again in the sewer fund. I'll cover it here. So implementing the new water rates, that's gonna be a task that we're gonna have to do come July 1, as long as council directs us to do that next week. And then looking for developing the debt issuance package. You know, right now we have it in our head to issue revenue bonds, but we're gonna look at every obvious grant opportunity, lower interest loan opportunity. We've already done our one-stop meeting with all of the public lending agencies. So we have an idea of what's out there and what the current interest rates. So we'll be bundling that funding package up early this next year to help. Not only, we're gonna be cash funding majority of this work in the next year or two, but come 2026 is really when we're gonna be spending a lot of money on these capital projects for the construction. So
Paul, can I ask you a question? Is there a possible chance of appeal to the legislature for some of these bigger infrastructure capital improvement projects?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, that's something we should always be working on, right? I mean, it never hurts.
yeah, I think Coco is probably gonna be spearheading some of that after
Yeah.
they get through with the rulemaking. Largely, we're not the only ones.
Right.
You know, so Redmond, Bend, us, Prineville, Madras, we all have these big infrastructure projects coming up because we've all grown.
Right.
So,
Fastest growing area in the
yep.
state.
Yeah, it's getting to be a crowded boat. The last two legislative sessions, there's been a lot of projects that have been funded either through the cash infusion from ARPA funds or Christmas tree bills. This last short session, a lot of the projects that were funded were associated with housing production. We'll probably see a continuation of that, but the governor's been interested in doing more infrastructure funding, how that kind of plays out in terms of bills and what that package looks like. And we know they're going to be focused on transportation this next session. But I think we'll be there in line to ask for our share for water and wastewater infrastructure.
Yeah,
We're
and just for everybody in the room, it's becoming increasingly popular at the legislature level and the governor's office that they love project lists and they love to be able to just fit spots in to help out cities especially with some of these larger projects because we're dealing with all the growth. So,
yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so well 3 generator and electrical improvements, we're under design right now. We'll wrap that up in the next couple months. This is really a system resiliency project that we were able to allocate some of our ARPA funds to. It's our largest well. It's one of the only wells it is the only well that doesn't have backup power. So we're gonna fix that problem. And it's not gonna provide growth capacity, so we got to pay for it out of the operating fund. We can't use STC dollars for it. But again, that 280,000 is essentially a grant pass through from the ARPA funds. And then we're gonna continue our wildfire mitigation work with the well 1 construction that did come up in our planning for the wildfire resiliency portion of our infrastructure to redo some of the things, not only on the building itself, but around the building to make it more resilient. So with that, I can run into Scar,
Pole One is located, off of Elm Street, kind of up in there.
where it hits Three Creeks Road. It's actually outside of the city limits.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
But so when we talk about, for those of you not familiar where it is right in that forest interface where it's very vulnerable should something come down through that direction.
Correct. Just real quick highlight on revenue, the 1.1 million in water receipts that came out of our water rate study. That was the target to hit with the new water rates. Part of the implementation of these new rates is we need to track them, and we will be tracking them and potentially making adjustments every year, at least for the next 4, 5, 6 years, because we have a new structure to our water rate that we're hoping we get some conservation benefit out of. The large users will pay more, hopefully benefit people, even the single family. You really pay for what you use. And if you decrease your water usage, you will have a lower water bill. But if you keep using more water, you're going to pay more. With that conservation effort, it could potentially end up with less revenue, right? Because we bill per gallon. So we're going to be watching that. And if we need to make that adjustment, we need to go back and either implement a capital project fee into the water rate or adjust the base rates, the fixed rates for that. So
When you were talking about the decreased use, was that aimed at the commercial user or the residential?
everybody, including us. Yep.
Thanks.
Then on the expense side, just want to show, electricity again. We're showing it flat, actually down a little bit. Next year with our lighting efficiency upgrades, pump upgrades at well 3 will help as well with the new electrical equipment. So we're anticipating a decrease on that line. And then the capital outlay line 906, the 987,000, that includes well 1 reconstruction, well 3 generator VFD improvements, a new really cool locate machine. We have some older pipe in our system that, for those of you of little pipe locating 101, nowadays, and we have for about the last 20 years, you bury a electrical line with your water pipe. So you can hook onto it at the end, run electricity through it and find it with a little machine that can locate that electricity. Well, the older lines that don't have that wire, that locate wire with them, how do you find them? And we don't want contractors to find them for us. So they make basically a sonar type machine, and it's expensive. It's $8,000, but we split it between the water and the sewer departments, and it'll allow us to go out and find lines just like the old water witching guys, or they hold the rods, and when they cross, a little bit more improved than that technology, but will definitely offset its costs with avoiding those collisions with contractors' backhoes in our water lines. Happy to answer any questions on the water fund.
Okay. Water SDC fund, page 79. Paul.
So kind of the same batch of projects that we talked about in the water fund, except we have a couple SDC funded, eligible funded projects, 100%. And those are really the growth related projects. And that is our new 2.2 million gallon reservoir. We need that for growth. That's gonna pay for not only for the growth that we have occurred to date, but also future growth through the 20-year planning period out to 2043. That's going to go right next to our existing reservoir. It's a very expensive project, about a little over $6 million. We're working with the U.S. Forest Service because it is on Forest Service property. We have a special use permit for that reservoir, but we have to do some environmental work to be able to construct those improvements. We're gonna be doing that. Then we're gonna procure a design build team for that project and get that going this year and start the design on that project. So we've budgeted money for those action items. And then coming from the reservoir, we are bringing a new transmission main into town. It's going to come down Edgington Road, which ties into 242 right across from the middle school. We're going to be following that road from a reservoir all the way down to 242, crossing 242, and tying into a 12-inch loop that runs all the way around our schools. It'll provide better fire flows, better water quality, and redundancy, because our existing line from the reservoir into town right now is not only pretty old, but it goes underneath the creek. And if you have a high flow event, you never know, that could be compromised and we could lose connection with our reservoir, which is not ideal. So this is a redundancy project, and this is one that we're definitely doing for Dave Moyer. He brought this to my attention years ago, and he's like, this is where it needs to go. This is what it's for. And I was like, you're absolutely right. So this one would be for you, Dave. On line 906, capital outlay, you're not seeing any construction money going out this year. What you're seeing is about $500,000 in line 726, contracted services, and that's for the design work starting on those big infrastructure projects.
Any questions? Okay, sewer fund. Paul, page 83.
Okay, in the sewer fund, in sewer SDC fund, coming out of our master plan update, we have $13 million in projects over the next 6 years. The ones that actually hit the sewer fund, the operating fund, is the Rope Street Pump Station, that last one. That's kind of the big one. So it's our main regional pump station down in the northeast corner of town. Everything gravity flows to that point and then it gets pumped up to our treatment plant where it enters the treatment plant process. What we're doing is replacing over 20-year-old pumps, antiquated electrical equipment, moving the generator outside. Right now it's inside the building, doesn't meet current electrical codes. And with that, it's about a $650,000 project and we'll be good for another 20 years. We do that. Part of why it's on this page, not only the staffing time goes to this fund, but the West Side Pump Station interacts with that Rope Street Pump Station when it gets built. Because right now, all that flow that comes from the west side of town, Hayden Homes, our commercial areas over there, the new subdivisions, the schools, everything essentially from the highway out will go and get diverted to the West Side Pump Station. What that does is it creates additional capacity on the west side for growth, and it allows Rope Street to use the same pumps that are in there that were put in 20 years ago to be adequately sized to provide for growth on the east side of town. So that's how they're working together. But I think digging into the revenue, again, sewer receipts, that 1.5 million came out of the rate update. That's what we're going to be targeting. The sewer rate structure is pretty resilient. Really, the only thing that affects it is potentially some water conservation if people are using less water that's going down into the drains. But for the most part, that's been squeezed out of development through, the requirement to use low flow fixtures, low flow toilets, those type of things. So we see a pretty stable income line with that fund. And then on the expense side, materials and services, again, electricity, want to point that out. That's even though we are treating more water our electricity costs are going down. So we're seeing that not only with the solar array, but with the energy improvements we've made up at the treatment plant. So in this line 906, capital outlay, we have 660,000 budgeted. That is for the Rope Street Pump Station. It's also going to pay for a new chlorine pump at our treatment plant. Again, it's the sewer department's share of that locate machine and then a contribution to that utility truck.
Any questions? Are you all awake?
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually wanted to make a little comment. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that, you know, we've had about sewer, in the past and making the Rope Street pump station, you know, making it adequate for growth because it looks like some of the possible UGB expansion is going to be in that area. So it's pretty exciting that we don't have to actually add the infrastructure to accommodate future growth. That's hard, you know, we're doing it now instead of waiting till whenever. So
I learned something important too. Do we have a street named Rope? I have no idea where it is, but I gotta go looking now.
It is on Rope Street,
Yeah,
Yep.
over there by Timber.
which is
Creek.
connected to Ranch Street, which is connected to Cowboy Street.
I love it.
We got it covered
Tollgate.
down there.
Bye-bye.
I did have a question on line 772, the right-of-way franchise fee. What is that for?
Yeah, so that is the sewer fund's 7% franchise fee to the street fund, just like CEC pays and Republic pays. Yep, and the water fund has that as well.
We pay ourselves.
Correct.
Got to account for it. All right, any, Gary?
Nope.
Michael?
I'm good.
Okay, sewer SDC fund, page 87, Paul.
Okay, so a couple things in this fund that we're excited about. Obviously, West Side Pump Station, we're going to be wrapping up the design and starting construction on that. I did not mention there is another component to that. It's not just building a pump station. We have to build a new force main over to Locust Street from Pine Street. So we're gonna put a pipeline from where the pump station is gonna be located on Pine Street. We're gonna go underneath the highway, bore under the highway, go up Pine Street to Jefferson, go down Jefferson and tie into the main trunk line going out to the treatment plant at Locust right there. So that's a large part of the project. A large part of the design budget is designing and building that pipeline.
And that was in the middle of Jefferson?
We're trying to work with the existing utilities there to keep it out of the street. And we're able to do that for about 6 of the 7 blocks. There will be 1 block, but we will be in the middle of the street.
It's interesting just to walk down, Jeff, and look where all the locating has already been done.
Yeah.
And what goes where, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, I was confused.
Literally.
Nope, no pun.
And that's all downhill, right? No pressure.
No, you can pump uphill.
Okay.
Yep. And then we have the Lazy Z Phase 1 improvements. We're not only going to start design, we're actually going to do some construction out there. We're going to put in the pivot that was contemplated in the master plan for our effluent irrigation. You see the pivots all over the agricultural area around Sisters. It's just the most efficient way to water a crop. You don't have to move it every day. It's pretty automated. So we'll be installing one of those, but that includes, you know, we have $320,000 for that, just a pivot, but it includes bringing power to the pivot base location, getting that 3-phase power service, also running the pipeline to that pivot base location. So we got some infrastructure as well as a pivot in that. So we'll
Does
be
that,
doing,
does that also have a GPS like some of them out in the farmlands do, where it has a GPS so it knows where it's watering? No?
sure it can. Yeah. I haven't seen that done, but I'm not a farmer either. So
You just tape a Garmin to the end of it. It's no big
sure.
deal.
Yeah. Yep.
Paul, the pivot line will also free a little bit of your staff time up that are out there currently moving the lines and those sorts of things. I don't know how often, but I see them out there quite a bit working with the small mound irrigation that's out there.
Absolutely. Yep. And we will continue using that equipment that we have purchased. Because the pivot, obviously we got a square field. Pivots around circles, so we'll have some areas, some corners that we're gonna put that infrastructure in and use it.
I figured as much, but at least it does mean that that staff can be utilized elsewhere.
Yep. So expenses wise, on line 726, contract services, 360,000, 260 is for the Lazy Z design. And then 100,000 to wrap up the West Side Pump Station design. That was originally a $200,000 design project. We'll have about half of it done this year, and half next year. The cap outlay line 906 for 320,000, that is exactly what I was talking about, the Lazy Z effluent pivot. So
That pivot, how long was it, supposed to last in year-wise as far as its useful life?
I hear 20 years.
Yeah.
It really depends on the quality of water
Yeah.
and quality being not drinking water quality, but how much debris is in the water.
Gotcha.
So I believe that pivot will last us a lot longer than the irrigation company's pivots because so much sand goes through those pipelines coming off the creek. So we won't have to deal with that.
Cool, thank you.
And on the 5-year forecast for the sewer projects, for the Lazy Z Phase 1 wetlands pivot, you know, kind of reaching into 2027. Is that just the pivot project or is that also including some of the actual wetlands?
It's the wetlands. Yep, that phase 1 includes pivot and the wetlands. So pivot this year, wetlands in the next year or two.
So maybe by 27 could be public access to that area?
That's what we're shooting for. Yeah. Yep.
And I want to thank whoever decided to do this sheet showing the projects and what percentages is SDC and what percentage, God, is operating fund, and some of the other ones, to be clear, it's helpful to have that information in back pocket. And I don't know if I've seen that in the past or I just ignored it, but it really is helpful.
Right.
I agree. I agree. All right, so I'm confused. We are at the end of the budget presentation by Joe. And now we go to the budget hearing, or do we insert the URA in here? Budget hearing, okay. I'm calling the meeting to order. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what my cheat sheet said, but I went, yeah, okay. So I'm calling the public hearing of state revenue sharing, a public hearing before the budget committee to discuss possible uses of the funds. And it says a staff report.
Yeah, so this is the opportunity for the public to comment on any, state shared revenues that are going to be received by the city and how those can be treated. So this hearing needs to be done at the budget meeting and then again at the budget adoption during the city council meeting.
Were there any public comments, Rebecca? None in person.
There's nobody attending site staff.
And any written?
Were there any written ones? No? Okay. So I'm now going to close the public hearing. And we segue into consideration of motions. A motion to approve the budget. Excuse me. I guess I'll read the whole thing since.
Yeah, and just real quick, budget chair. So that's actually 2.6417, not 147.
I'm sorry, 2.6417.
Yep.
Okay.
It's important to know. Whoever's gonna make the motion.
2.6417, okay. We're looking for discussion and a motion to approve a budget committee of the sisters adopting, approving taxes for the 2024-25 fiscal year at the rate of 2.6417 per thousand of assessed value for the permanent rate tax levy. Their discussion, starting with Gary. None? Doug?
Now, my only comment that I had was just with the reserves. I mean, for the amount of budget that we have, it seems like our reserves in general are very high, which, you know, is obviously very healthy for the city, but I mean, is it like too healthy? My only question that posed the group.
Yeah, I think we're gonna spend a lot of those reserves too.
We are, I mean,
Yeah.
we certainly will, but it's, I mean, there's we're also talking about some rate hikes, you know, that would offset that to some degree, and
Yeah, of course.
I don't know what the rule of thumb is on what you should have for capital reserves versus your budget, but it just seems, at least in my mind, that, you know, we're pretty thick.
Aren't we looking like $30 million worth of projects over the next 5 years?
Yeah, and a requirement for our bonding consideration from the bonding agencies is to increase our reserves, our operating reserves from 2 months to 6 months. That gets us a better bond rating, potentially cheaper interest rates. So part of that's gonna get sucked into there. But through the rates, the water rates would have been much higher. They would have been up in the 30% per year for multiple years if we didn't use that cash. And we are spending all of that cash in
Yeah.
the water and the sewer funds in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, so not so much this particular budget, but it's
It does
forecast.
not make our finance director very happy when he sees interest income go
Ah,
to a third of
It's
what.
been a good
it has
run.
been.
$1,630,000 or whatever, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
No, but I think that's a fair question.
No,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it is. Yeah, because it
It's,
is.
and it's a reminder to council especially, you know, we kind of have our hands right on the purse a little bit, and it's noted for sure.
my first year on a budget committee for the city, I was like you, why do we have so much in reserve? And I called City of Lapine and said, look, we've got 3 months operating reserve and it's X amount. Tell me that we're crazy. And they said, no, you're not crazy. This is how we do business, and here's why you need the reserves, and here's why you need that 3 months of operating. So I'm with you. It's heavy, but there's a reason
Okay.
for it.
I think we're,
Thank you.
yeah, and taking advantage of the situation we're currently in when we do have growth and things like lodging taxes, savings that we're seeing, this is the time to plan for a rainy day, having to budget and work through downturns like the Great Recession. It does come in handy. So this is the time where you are able to build up those reserves and the rainy day funds, say for in the general fund. And that being said, you know, there's general practices and rules of thumb that we follow, right? The 3 months of operating. Paul made a good point about, you know, in our utility funds, but also general fund, full faith and credit or GO bonds. We're gonna want a high credit rating, right? I mean, that, and one of the first things that credit agencies look at is your reserve policies and how much do you have, you know, saved in the bank for the rainy days, right? And I don't know if we're big enough to ever get to the AAA, but we'll work our way towards that, because you get up there and you get a lot better interest rates on those on that debt. Good question.
I've been doing budget committee since 2018, and this is easily the best one. Easily. It seems like every year we improve it just a little bit, or you guys improve it a little bit. And thank you for listening to some of our feedback, but for the most part, this is easily the most understandable,
Yes.
and it's hard work. It shows up. It just shows up. So thanks.
I think too, I would add city budget committee for a while, but I've got 15 years of budget committee before that in an elected agency, and before that in a school district that tended to hide its money in the budget in different places. So the openness and the transparency makes it more obvious what's there. But, and I also think it says we're being clear and upfront about it. And if the staff didn't have a clear explanation as to why those funds are there and where they're going, I would be concerned about it as well. And so, I mean, I guess I'm comfortable with it if we follow through and do all the things we say we're gonna do, and I know we are. That's kind of where I'm at. And we could have this discussion in 3 years, and that reserve fund's gonna look a lot different than it does now. And we'll be talking about debt service, and we'll be talking about paying off significant debt. And if we can save 1% or 2%, that makes the city healthier, and it makes our future budgets healthier. That's kind of where my brain is on this.
If we were bad at budgeting, the room would be full. The room would be full with public, the public saying, what are you doing? the reason there's nobody here is because we're good at this, you, as a city, as a community, so that's to your credit.
Not we, them.
Yeah, I say we as a community, but they did all the work, right? So,
That's the royal we.
yeah.
Susan, did you have comments to add?
No, I
No,
don't.
Robin? No? Cheryl?
No.
Jennifer?
I think just to Doug's point, we have so many fees and rates changing this year and into next year, it's certainly something to keep an eye on of just really how those play out in the next year or two and see if they're adequate or too much or, that's always, I think that will definitely be on our minds moving forward in a year or two to see how all those impacts affected us financially, but yeah, otherwise no other comments.
I have none to add other than well done. It was clear, concise, easy to read and understand. I appreciate that. I think Andrea, besides staff, was the only other counselor here at one point where we would go through this with a ruler, line by line by line, and it was a horrific experience. I hated budget committee. And the fact this year that I called Joe last week and said, hey, it's Wednesday, where's my book? And that I was happy to attend today is a testimony to how painless this is, and anyone in the committee or community could serve on the budget committee. No special skills required, just an interest and the ability to read and understand documents. So well done, all of you. Thank you. And with that, I am looking for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt a tax rate of 2.6417 per thousand for the 2024-2025 budget year. I think I said that right. Without anything
Of assessed value.
Of assessed value, thank you.
Okay.
I knew I left something out.
Rebecca, was that clear? Okay, looking for a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, aye. Any opposed? None. Okay, motion carries. And I need a motion to have the Budget Committee of the City of Sisters approve the budget for the fiscal year 2024-25 in the amount of $33,036,541.
I move the Budget Committee of the City of Sisters approve the budget for the fiscal year 2024-25 in the amount of $33,036,541.
Second.
Okay,
Split that
Third,
three
fourth,
ways.
fifth.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. So moved. Okay, and now because you are all such diligent workers, I need a motion to cancel the Thursday, May 16th, 2024 budget meeting.
Madam Chair, I move to cancel the May
16th.
16th, thank you. My brain's dead. Budget committee meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay. I am closing the when do we budget meeting?
We do the urban.
Where you're going to open another budget meeting and do the urban.
Separate budget.
Yeah. So you have a 5-minute break.
Yeah, I will.
Between this and the.
Are you welcome? Yeah.
Meeting. Okay,
Fine.
we'll go through.
I'll stop.
Process. Yeah. I didn't look on the back side to see URA on one of these pages. I have too many pages.